As soon as I stepped into the wedding garden, the very moment I expected to see my daughter walk out in her white dress, I froze. Hanging right at the entrance under 2 rows of glowing golden lights was a large board with a photo of me and my husband. Underneath, in bold letters sharp as a blade, it read, "Do not let these 2 people in, by order of the bride." I stood motionless while my husband, Mark, went red, then pale. Guests glanced at us with puzzled looks, but they didn't know one thing. This entire wedding was secretly paid for with my own money, and they also didn't know that just a few hours later, I would destroy this ceremony in a way no one could ever imagine. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Evelyn Carter, 61 years old, living in a quiet town in Ohio. I never thought my life would lead to a day like this, standing at the entrance of my own daughter's wedding, treated like a stranger, even forbidden to step inside. That feeling didn't even resemble sadness anymore. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out, placed it on a scale, and declared that I wasn't worth a single cent in my daughter's eyes. We had driven more than 3 hours to get there. Mark prepared a small speech, folded neatly and tucked into his suit pocket. I had spent the entire night before wrapping a little wedding gift, a white lace handkerchief my mother left me, a family heirloom. I wanted to give it to my daughter on the most important morning of her life. Every small hope vanished the moment I saw that wretched photo. I turned to Mark. His eyes trembled in a way I had never seen. We'd been married for more than 40 years. I'd seen him angry, exhausted, defeated, but never hurt the way he was at that moment. "Evelyn, what is this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, my head spinning, my legs glued to the ground. A young hotel attendant walked toward us, his face full of worry. I'm really sorry. I was instructed that if the 2 of you showed up, we can't let you in. This is a direct order from the bride. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. The bride he referred to was Madeline Carter, my only child, the daughter I once held through long, feverish nights, the daughter I worked 2 shifts to pay for through college, the daughter I thought would hug me tightly on her wedding day. No, she chose to hang my picture outside the venue like I was a wanted criminal. Guests passing by glanced at us, some avoiding eye contact, others staring out of curiosity. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a public square, being stoned by the very person I raised. I squeezed Mark's hand. "Let's go," I whispered, my voice hoarse. He nodded. Neither of us said another word. We quietly turned away, each step heavier than the last. Every step felt like another cut to my heart. I heard the wedding music drifting from afar. The gentle violin sounded as if it were mocking my humiliation. When we reached the parking lot, I couldn't hold myself up anymore. I stopped, leaning against the car door, trying to breathe so I wouldn't collapse right there. I didn't want Mark to have to catch me like someone whose bones had just been shattered. "Evelyn, are you all right?" Mark asked, his voice trembling with worry. I pressed my lips together. "Mark, I really don't understand. Why would she do this? Why today, of all days?" He looked at me and shook his head. "I don't know, but standing here won't change anything. Let's go back to the hotel." We got into the car. Mark started the engine, but his hands were shaking. I placed my hand over his, searching for any warmth left in this moment of devastation. As the car rolled away from the dazzling wedding garden, I looked through the window. Everything behind us still looked beautiful, perfect, while inside, My heart had shattered into 1,000 pieces. On the way back to the hotel, I tried to stay calm, but tears streamed down my face. Images of Madeline as a child replayed over and over, her messy blonde hair on school mornings, her bright laugh running across the yard, the tight hug she gave me the first time she earned an A. I once believed those sacrifices would be the bond between mother and daughter. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe when a child grows up with everything, she might accidentally see her mother's love as an obligation. I never imagined I had raised someone who could treat me as a burden. I tried to comfort myself. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Madeline didn't know. Maybe someone else hung the sign without her knowing. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Madeline knew. Madeline agreed. Madeline wanted this. I remembered the months preparing for the wedding, the moment I transferred $92,000 to the event planner, money I had saved for more than 30 years. I remembered how relieved I felt knowing my daughter would have the perfect day she dreamed of. I hid it from Madeline because I thought if she knew I paid, she would feel embarrassed or guilty. I hid it out of love, out of a mother's instinct to protect. But today, standing forbidden at the wedding entrance, I realized my daughter didn't feel grateful at all. She saw me as a debt, or worse, an embarrassment to hide. The car stopped in front of the hotel. Mark turned off the engine, but he didn't step out. He turned to me. "Evelyn, I know this hurts, but you have to understand. She's not the little girl we raised anymore. She changed when she got involved with the Whitmore family." I looked down at my hands, the veins raised, the faint calluses from years in the laundromat. I had built my entire life around Madeline. I never imagined the child I raised would be the one to push me out of her life on the most important day she had. I inhaled deeply. "Mark, did I do something wrong? Or are we just too poor, too ordinary for them?" Mark placed his warm hand on my shoulder. "No, Evelyn, we didn't do anything wrong, but sometimes being endlessly kind makes others think they have the right to walk all over you." I nodded, but inside me, something shifted, a feeling both painful and cold, as if a new door had opened, and behind it was a version of myself I had never dared to become, a version of Evelyn Carter, who would no longer bow her head. I looked out the window toward the golden lights of the wedding still flickering from afar. "Mark, you know what? I think I've been too gentle." "Gentle?" Mark frowned. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think it's time I take back everything I've given away." He stared at me, trying to read my thoughts, but even I wasn't fully certain yet. I only knew one thing. Tonight, I would no longer be the woman who endured humiliation in silence. A frightening yet clear idea began forming in my mind, slowly, quietly, but powerful enough to make me shiver. If Madeline wanted to erase me from her life on her most important day, then I could show her exactly who held all the real power over this ceremony. And I would not shed another tear. I sat silently in the hotel room, my eyes still slightly swollen after hours of holding back tears. But as memories flooded back, I no longer felt humiliated. Instead, I felt hollow, as if an invisible hand was opening each drawer of my past, forcing me to look closely, from where I started to the moment I lost the very child I raised. I was born in a tiny town in northern Ohio where winter winds blew so cold the window glass froze every morning. My family was poor, not the kind of poor where you skip a few luxuries, but so poor my parents burned scrap wood and cardboard to keep us warm. I grew up surrounded by the hum of an old heater and dinners of thin soup, but my father taught me the most important thing. being poor wasn't the same as being worthless. And my mother taught me that a woman must stand on her own 2 feet. I carried those lessons throughout my life. When I married Mark, we started from nothing. Mark worked as a delivery driver for a furniture company. I got a job at a small laundromat on Main Street. The pay was small, but we saved every cent by cutting every expense possible. I became familiar with the smell of detergent, the damp chill of clothes straight out of old machines. My youth lived between heavy laundry baskets and hours of standing on aching legs. But it didn't matter, because when Madeline was born, every sacrifice became something I wanted to do. Madeline was stunning from day one. Soft brown hair, blue-gray eyes she inherited from Mark, and a smile that made me forget the scent of bleach still clinging to my hands. From the moment she could walk, we gave her everything our limited means allowed. I remember waking early to make pancakes before school, coming home from my shift and stopping by the thrift store to find her a little pink dress she would love. I wanted my daughter to grow up with what I never had, safety and enough. Madeline was brilliant. At 7, she read faster than her classmates. At 13, she won a small state science award. I cried with pride when her teacher told me, "Mrs. Carter, your daughter is exceptional." But sometimes I knew I spoiled her more than necessary. I justified it as making up for my own childhood. I thought loving more meant she would love me more. I was wrong. When she got into college, Mark and I worked harder so she wouldn't feel limited like we once did. I took on a second job cleaning offices at night. Every day I left the laundromat at 5, ate a quick sandwich, then worked until late. In winter, when snow piled thick and my back throbbed with pain, I still pushed through because I wanted her to have a future brighter than anything I could imagine. I don't remember how many hours I worked each week. I only remember holding that first $5,000 tuition bill and crying because I had actually managed to pay it. Madeline knew I worked hard, but as she settled into college life, her calls became fewer. First several a week, then once a week, then only occasionally. I understood. She was becoming independent, living the life Mark and I had worked so hard to give her. I didn't resent it, but I will never forget the day she graduated. She wore a black gown, a square cap, and honor cord around her neck. When she looked at me and Mark, she beamed, a smile I once thought I would never lose. "Mom, I did it," she said, and I cried in the middle of the campus lawn. I was proud, so proud it hurt. But pride lasted only a short while. After she started working, Madeline came home less. Her stories centered on coworkers, clients, business trips, fancy events in Columbus and Cleveland. We became background figures, appearing only during holidays. Then one day she called to say she wanted to bring her boyfriend home. I hoped he would be kind, like Mark, someone genuine, hardworking, steady. But when Andrew Whitmore stepped through the door, I knew immediately that my daughter's path had taken a sharp turn. Andrew was the type of man who believed he was above others. Expensive suit, gleaming watch, a voice polite yet cold. He shook Mark's hand with barely any pressure, then scanned our home as if assessing its monetary value. I disliked him instantly. But Madeline, she was dazzled. Her eyes lit up whenever he spoke about managing finances, his wealthy family in Chicago, vacations in the Florida Keys. I saw clearly she was mesmerized by a world we had never belonged to and had never sought. I stayed polite, joined the conversation, but felt the first needle prick at the bond between me and my daughter. The second meeting was worse. The Whitmore family invited us to dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Columbus. The moment I stepped inside, I felt out of place. White tablecloths, layered wine glasses, dishes, expensive enough to cover a week of rent. Margaret, Andrew's mother, looked me up and down and said, "Oh, you made it." Polite words, cold tone. All dinner long, she questioned my laundromat job, not out of interest, but superiority. Andrew spoke about the family's business investments, elite social circles, exclusive events. Every sentence implied that Madeline was moving up into a world far above us. Mark tried to stay composed, but his eyes often dropped to the tablecloth, anger mixed with resignation. That night, riding home, I sat in the back seat silently asking myself, what had I created? How had I raised a child who didn't notice the disrespect from the family she was marrying into? I never found an answer. Madeline's changes came gradually but clearly. She visited less, called less. When she did come home, she talked only about Andrew, where they went, who they met, their elevated plans for the future. Not once did she ask if I was still working 2 jobs, or how my health was, or if Mark was doing all right. The distance grew, and for the first time in my motherhood, I feared losing my daughter. The turning point came when Madeline announced Andrew had proposed. I wanted to be happy, but her smile wasn't the smile I used to know. It was the smile of someone stepping into a life where we were merely shadows behind her. That was the first small crack in my heart, a crack that the sign at the wedding entrance shattered entirely. I sat on the hotel bed holding the lace handkerchief, asking myself, how did I raise her for her to remove me from her life in the most brutal way? But that question had no time for answers, because a harsher truth settled in. Today was merely the result of a long chain of hurts. Hurts I had ignored because I kept telling myself my daughter still loved me the way she once did. I didn't know then that all of this was only the beginning of deeper pain and betrayal waiting ahead. I was still leaning against the hotel headboard, gripping the lace handkerchief as if it were the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Memories of Madeline and years of raising her twisted together in my mind, carrying me toward another moment I should have recognized sooner, the first dinner with the Whitmore family. Looking back, it feels like the first chapter of a book I wish I had never opened. That afternoon, I woke earlier than usual to clean the house. I wanted our small home to look warm and tidy. I baked apple pie, Madeline's childhood favorite, thinking it might make her feel like she was coming back to the home she grew up in. I polished the wooden dining table and placed a vase of white daisies in the center. Mark went to the grocery store for extra drinks, nervously asking me, should I wear the blue shirt or the white one? I laughed and said, either one, Mark. They're coming to meet us, not interview us. He chuckled softly, but I knew he was anxious. Both of us wanted to make a good impression on the man our daughter had chosen. When the doorbell rang, my heart pounded as if I were preparing for an important ceremony. Madeline walked in first, her hair softly curled, her face glowing. She gave me a quick hug, then stepped aside to introduce Andrew. Andrew wore a charcoal shirt under an expensive blazer, and his shoes were so shiny I could have seen my reflection in them. He smiled and extended his hand, but his eyes swept across my living room as if he were checking the value of every item. I had never liked that look. It wasn't the look of someone curious or wanting to know his future wife's family. It was the look of someone appraising merchandise. Wonderful. Thank you for having me, Andrew said, his voice polite, crisp, and a bit too perfectly measured. I invited them to sit and brought out the apple pie. Madeline took a bite and smiled, a rare smile I hadn't seen on her in a long time. But Andrew only tasted a small piece and said, "Oh, very homey." His tone sounded both like praise and like a subtle suggestion that my baking wasn't quite up to standard. Mark glanced at me, and I just smiled as if I hadn't heard anything. But the moment I went into the kitchen to pour tea, I heard Andrew whisper to Madeline, "Too sweet. You know I don't like old-fashioned baked goods." Madeline let out a soft laugh. "Mom's been making it like that forever." I stood there behind the kitchen door for a few seconds, feeling the air around me disappear. But I walked out again, keeping my smile, convincing myself I was being oversensitive. It was the first meeting, I reminded myself, and I wanted to believe Andrew was simply a little snobbish, not a bad person. I was wrong. A week later, Andrew's family invited us to dinner at an upscale restaurant in downtown Columbus. I had already felt uneasy when Madeline called earlier and said, "Mom, just wear something comfortable." That sentence made me anxious. Her idea of comfortable was nothing like what comfortable meant for me. I chose a simple navy dress Mark had given me for our anniversary. It wasn't brand name, but it was clean, lovely, and appropriate. Mark wore the blue shirt I had picked for him last time. We walked into the restaurant. Warm, dim lighting, soft violin music, the faint scent of wine drifting through the air. I felt like I was stepping into a world that wasn't meant for me. The Whitmore family was already seated. Margaret, Andrew's mother, looked up and scanned me from head to toe. Her gaze lingered slightly too long on my shoes, then moved to Mark, then to the inexpensive handbag I was holding. "Oh," she said, lips curving faintly. "Very simple." I heard her clearly. Everyone did. But Mark gave a polite smile, and I tried not to let the heat of embarrassment rise up my cheeks. Dinner began with questions disguised as small talk, but laced with condescension. Margaret asked what I did for a living. I answered honestly. I worked at a small laundromat near our home. She raised an eyebrow. "Ah, that must be quite tiring." I knew that tone. People used it when they didn't want to openly admit they looked down on your job. Then she turned to Mark. She asked whether a delivery driver's salary was sufficient. The question carried no kindness at all, and I saw Mark's back stiffen and his hand tighten around the napkin. Meanwhile, Andrew talked about his family, about their investment companies, about parties in Chicago, about real estate projects I couldn't even understand. Every word he said felt like a reminder of the distance between their world and ours. Margaret looked at Madeline with calculated pride. "She's so smart, so beautiful. She deserves a better future, don't you think?" I knew exactly what she meant by a better future, and I knew she said it deliberately in front of me. But I stayed silent. I didn't want to make Madeline uncomfortable. Mark, unlike me, couldn't hide his emotions well. He kept glancing at me, his eyes filled with frustration and helplessness. But he restrained himself. For Madeline. For what was supposed to be a beautiful evening. A little later, Andrew took Madeline's hand, kissed the back of it, and announced, "I've proposed to Madeline. My family will take care of the entire wedding. We want a ceremony that matches our standards." Madeline nearly teared up with joy. I felt my heart beat slow, not because I wasn't happy for her, but because something inside me suddenly sharpened. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it. It felt like a cold draft down my spine, like an alarm quietly going off in the back of my mind. I looked at the Whitmores, the perfect smiles, the arrogant eyes, the polished words, and I knew nothing here was genuine. Not the promises, not the generosity, not the welcome they pretended to give Madeline. And it didn't take long for that intuition to prove itself in the cruelest way possible. The days after the dinner in Columbus, the uneasiness stayed with me. It wasn't a sudden blow like lightning. It was a slow, creeping fog settling into every corner of my thoughts. I tried to deny it, telling myself my daughter was simply growing up, stepping into a world I wasn't familiar with. But then, one afternoon, Madeline came to my house. And the moment she spoke, I knew the change wasn't small anymore. I had just finished my shift at the laundromat, my hand still carrying a faint scent of detergent. Madeline walked in, dressed neatly as if she had just left an important office meeting. I invited her to sit in the kitchen, where I had prepared 2 cups of mint tea, our old habit whenever she visited. But this time, she didn't look at the tea, didn't ask if I was tired. She only leaned against the counter, crossing her arms as if she were preparing for a negotiation rather than talking to her mother. "Mom," she began, her voice light as if hiding something, "Andrew's family has decided they'll cover the entire wedding cost." I forced myself to stay calm. "Oh, I see. Yes, so you and Dad don't need to worry about anything." She said it with a relieved expression, as if she had just dropped a burden she'd been carrying. But that relief pierced me. Since when had our lack of wealth become something that embarrassed her? I nodded and smiled. "If that's what you want, I won't object." Madeline hugged me briefly, then left almost immediately. When the door shut behind her, the house felt strangely cold. I stood still for a long moment, a nameless weight pressing on my chest. Something wasn't right. I picked up the phone and searched for the event planning company Madeline had mentioned the night before. When the staff answered, I tried to sound casual. "Hi, I'm the mother of the bride, Madeline Carter. I'd like to ask about the event cost." The woman quickly opened the file. "Yes, the estimated total is $92,000. But we haven't received any deposit or payment yet." I went silent. I had to take a deep breath before answering. "None at all?" "That's correct. We're waiting for the contract holder to make the transfer." When I hung up, my hands were ice cold. So the Whitmore family never planned to pay. Every generous promise had been a performance. A show meant to make Madeline feel lucky to be marrying into their world and to make her believe they were a stronger support system than the parents who raised her. I sat down, staring out at the backyard where the old maple tree stood, silent as if listening, and the only thought I had was, if they won't pay, what will happen to the wedding? And worse, did Madeline know? Or was she also a victim of their shiny lies? I couldn't let my daughter be humiliated. No matter how much she had changed, no matter how much it hurt, I was still her mother. And a mother doesn't let her child fall in front of hundreds of people. That night, I called the event planning company back. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll pay the entire cost, but one condition. Do not tell anyone, including the bride, that I am the one paying." The staff member hesitated, then agreed. I transferred the money in 3 large payments, amounts I never imagined I would spend in my lifetime. When it was done, I sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the dry ticking of the wall clock. I had emptied nearly all the savings Mark and I had built over 30 years, money meant for our peaceful retirement. But the part that hurt most wasn't the money. It was knowing that if Andrew or the Whitmores claimed later that they paid for everything, Madeline would believe them immediately without asking me a single question. In the following days, whenever Madeline called, not to check on me, but to gush about how generous Andrew's family was, my heart shrank a little more. I heard her pride in things I knew were lies. I smiled through the phone, hiding the hollow ache inside. I wanted to tell her the truth, but every time I tried, I imagined her face, bright eyes, confident voice, blind trust in the Whitmore family. I feared she'd think I was jealous, or worse, that I wanted to sabotage her wedding, so I stayed silent. I told myself her happiness was enough, that she would eventually understand my love. But as time passed, she called less. Messages became shorter. "I'm busy, Mom," or "Don't worry, I've got everything handled." I felt myself being pushed out of the very life I had built for her. Stories of the Whitmores filled the space between us. She dined with them, traveled with them, attended their exclusive parties, never once inviting me. Every photo she posted made me disappear a little more. I realized then it wasn't that their world was too big. It was that they wanted mine to become too small for her to see. One morning, while I was folding clothes at the laundromat, Mark called. Madeline had texted that she couldn't come for dinner that weekend. She had a business networking event with Andrew's family. I only said, "It's okay, don't be upset." But inside, memories of raising her scattered like fallen leaves in a storm. Distance doesn't come in one day. It arrives from many quiet moments. Moments when I convinced myself everything was fine. Moments when I ignored hurtful words. Moments when I believed motherly love was a wall that could never collapse. But the wall had already fallen, and I stood among the rubble, not knowing how to make my daughter see me the way she once did. I didn't know then that everything I had endured was only the beginning of something far more painful and far more cruel, something that would lead to the moment I was humiliated at her wedding entrance, and then to the moment I decided to reclaim the power I had given away for so many years. I remember that afternoon vividly. Gray skies, heavy clouds, hanging low over Ohio like a warning. I stood in front of Madeline's apartment door for a long time before pressing the bell, not because I was afraid of being turned away, but because I feared hearing something that would hurt even more than what I had already suffered. But I knew I had to go. I had to talk. I had to understand what was happening to the daughter I had spent my entire life protecting. I inhaled deeply and rang the bell. The door opened within 3 seconds, and instead of Madeline, it was Andrew standing there. He wore a white shirt buttoned to the collar, holding his phone like whatever conversation he'd been having was more important than anything else. When he saw me, his eyebrows tightened. Just slightly, but enough for me to understand I was not a welcome sight. "Ah, Mrs. Carter." He glanced at his watch. "Madeline didn't say you were coming today." I forced politeness into my voice. "I just want to talk to her for a moment. Just a few minutes." Andrew stepped aside, though stiffly, as if he were letting in a delivery person rather than his future mother-in-law. I walked in, trying to smile, though the coldness in that beautifully decorated apartment made me shiver. It was elegant and perfectly arranged, but missing something I couldn't name. Warmth, soul, life. Madeline came out of the bedroom holding a thick clipboard. Her hair was pulled into a high ponytail, and she wore a sleek, smart band on her wrist. She looked at me, hesitated for a second, then said, slightly rushed, "Mom, I'm getting ready for a meeting with the wedding planner. What do you need?" A simple question, but not a hint of joy at seeing me. I forced a bright expression. "I just wanted to check if you needed any help. The wedding is coming soon." Madeline sighed. "Andrew's family is handling everything. You really don't need to worry." The way she stressed the word "they" made me pause. Still, I swallowed it down, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about our seating for the ceremony? No one from the planning team has contacted me, so I just want to be sure." Madeline glanced at Andrew as if seeking permission. Andrew shrugged, then answered for her. "There are many important guests from my family, so your table will be a standard one in the middle section. It can't be near the stage." I looked at them. 3 seconds passed, long enough to age someone. I turned to Madeline. You decided that? Madeline reluctantly nodded. Mom, there will be business people, Dad Andrew's friends. You understand, right? You and Dad still get a nice table, just not the main one. I once thought I was strong, but hearing that felt like a stone dropping onto my chest, not because of the seating, because for the first time, my daughter saw me as someone outside her life. I tried to keep my voice from shaking. And the tradition of your father walking you down the aisle? Madeline looked at Andrew again. That single glance told me everything. My daughter was no longer someone who would speak for herself. She was waiting for him to speak for her. Andrew cleared his throat. We're not doing that old giving the bride away tradition. Madeline will walk in alone. She's independent. It's modern. Madeline gave a small, awkward smile. You understand, right? I don't want to look like a traditional bride. The word traditional felt like a cold blade pressing into my chest. All those years I held on to traditions, family dinners, holidays, little routines that shaped Madeline's childhood, now dismissed as outdated burdens. I stared at my daughter, the same child who once ran through our backyard as Mark and I chased after her, the child who clung to me during nightmares, the child who cried when classmates teased her. And there she was, telling me. Everything I represented was an embarrassment. Why, Madeline? I asked softly. Why don't you want your father and me near you on your wedding day? She froze for only a second. Then she looked away as if searching for the kindest possible lie. It's not like that, Mom. It's just, there are certain images we need to present at the wedding. You know, Andrew's family does big business. I don't want to make them uncomfortable. I heard the meaning behind every word. I understood that we, Mark and I, did not fit the image my daughter wanted to display. I took a deep breath. Let me ask you one thing, Madeline. Do you still see your father and me as family? Madeline grew uneasy and turned away. Andrew stood right behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, as if both comforting her and asserting control. Mom, don't make this a big deal, Madeline said. I'm very busy. Busy. One simple word, yet it drew a clear line between us. I found myself standing in my own daughter's apartment, feeling like every decoration and every color on the walls whispered the same message. You don't belong here anymore. I nodded. I understand. I turned around. Andrew didn't walk me out, and Madeline didn't follow. When the door closed behind me, I stood in the cold, bright hallway, my hands trembling, and then I cried. Not the angry, heaving kind of cry. It was the cry of someone stripped of the most sacred place she'd ever held in life, the place of being a mother. I cried so hard I didn't hear the elevator open. Mark was waiting for me in the car. When I got in, he saw my swollen eyes and didn't ask anything. He simply placed his hand over mine, lightly, but enough for me to feel the grief spreading through every part of me. I leaned my head against the window, watching the blur of cars outside. The air inside the car felt heavy as lead. Mark spoke softly. Evelyn, don't let her hurt you like this. I know how much you love her, but maybe she's not the little girl she used to be. I nodded without looking at him. But I still hope on her wedding day she'll realize how unreasonable she's been. I still want to believe that. Mark gently squeezed my hand. Hope is the last thing we should let go of. But deep in my heart, I knew that hope was already cracking. I felt like I was clinging to a rope that was fraying strand by strand, held together only by fragile belief. I didn't know that. Just days later, that same daughter would leave me standing before a wedding gate. staring at a picture that barred me from entering, and the heartbreak of this afternoon would become the final warning I failed to heed. 1 week before the wedding, when, under normal circumstances, I should have been counting down the hours until my daughter stepped into a new chapter, Madeline called me. I remember clearly. I was in the kitchen, just lifting the lid off a pot of chicken soup when the ICO phone buzzed. Her voice sounded calm, but underneath that calmness was something sharp, something only a mother who'd grown accustomed to disappointment could detect. "Mom," she said quickly, as if she had another meeting waiting. "I need your help with something." I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "All right, go ahead." And then, with one single sentence, she delivered a blow so staggering that even now, when I remember it, my chest feels hollowed out. "Mom, can you cut everyone from our side of the guest list? Andrew's family guests are increasing. I need to prioritize people. Important for my future." I froze. The spoon slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a small but echoing clang that filled the quiet kitchen like the toll of a bell. I couldn't speak for several seconds. I just stood there, trying to register what my daughter had asked of me. "Madeline," I whispered, my voice trembling like a child's first lie. "Cut everyone?" But they already received their invitations. "We double-checked," Madeline replied, still breezy. "Your list has a lot of people who really don't have anything to do with my new life. They don't serve any purpose for me and Andrew." It felt like a slap across my face, not because she wanted to cut guests, but because of how she spoke about the very people who had helped me raise her through the hardest years, the ones who brought over cans of soup when money was tight, who babysat her when I worked double shifts, who treated her like family though we shared no blood. "You're saying they don't serve any purpose for your future?" I managed to ask, though my throat felt like it was blocked with stone. Madeline sighed as if I was the difficult one. "Mom, don't make this heavy. It's my wedding. I want everything perfect. Andrew's family has a lot of important connections. You know that. I can't seat his father's business partners next to our relatives from Dayton. It just wouldn't look right." My hand began to shake. "But they're our family, sweetheart." Madeline went silent for a few seconds. Then she dropped the sentence that shoved me off the cliff. "Family has limits too, Mom. You understand that." No, I did not understand. I had always believed sacrifice was the language of motherhood, that if I loved her enough, she would know. But in that moment, I realized some children, when placed under glittering lights, forget the warm lamps that once kept them safe. Madeline continued, brisk and decisive. "Please notify everyone. Just tell them there's a seating issue. Make it sound polite for me." I leaned against the counter because without it, I might have collapsed. I couldn't believe this was the same little girl who once clung to my leg and cried when another child refused to share a toy. "All right," I whispered. "I'll take care of it." There was no thank you, no hesitation, just a quick, "Good, I'm busy, Mom." And then the line went dead. I looked around the kitchen, the towel, the chicken soup, the spoon on the floor. Everything seemed familiar, yet I no longer recognized myself. That night, I called each relative, my cousin, my 2 nieces, my elderly aunt in Cincinnati, Uncle Harold's family, people who had never once missed any milestone in our lives. And each time I had to repeat the lie, "Oh, it's just a seating issue. We have to cut back. Please understand." Every voice on the other end carried disappointment softened by kindness. "It's all right, Evelyn, as long as she's happy." I bit my lip until I tasted blood just to stop myself from crying on the phone. When I hung up after the last call, I couldn't hold back any longer. I set the phone down and let the tears fall. Not just tears of hurt, but of betrayal over how my daughter had trampled every value that once held our family together. Mark heard me crying and rushed in from the living room. He held me without asking because he already knew. He had seen the distance growing every day. I pressed my face into his shoulder, my voice breaking. "Mark, she said our family doesn't serve any purpose for her future." Mark closed his eyes, his hands gripping my shoulders. "Evelyn, I'm sorry. I know you're hurting, but you don't deserve this. You don't." I shook my head, tears falling on his shirt like ink stains. "What if we tell her the truth? You paid all $92,000. She wouldn't disrespect us like this if she knew," Mark said plainly. I stayed silent for a long time. Then I shook my head. "No, not now. If she finds out I paid, she'll shame herself in front of her new family. She'll think I did it to pressure her or out of jealousy. I don't want that." Mark looked at me, his eyes a mix of worry and heartbreak. "But if you keep letting her treat you like this..." I cut in softly. "On her wedding day, she'll see me there. She'll realize how wrong she's been. I believe that. The wedding will be the moment she understands." I said it, but deep down I knew that hope was fragile. So fragile that the slightest breeze could shatter it. I wanted to believe in my daughter so badly it made me foolish. I wanted to think that somewhere inside her there was still room for me. That night I cried until I was exhausted, until my eyes burned. I fell asleep with that tiny, flickering hope that the wedding would mend what had been broken. But I was wrong. When the wedding day arrived, I fixed my silvering hair, put on the navy dress Mark loved most, and held the small gift I'd wrapped all week. I stepped out of the hotel with my heart full of hope. Hope that my daughter would see me, smile, and run to hug me like she used to. Instead, when Mark and I stepped up to the garden gate, under the soft glow of golden lights, a massive sign greeted us. On it was our picture, and the bold, slicing words, "Do not let these two in, bride's orders." In that moment, the last drop of hope inside me was crushed into dust, and I, someone who once believed love was enough, stood there learning how to breathe again after having my heart shattered. I don't remember how I got back to the hotel. I only remember sitting stiffly in the car, hands trembling in my lap, unable to process any of it. Mark placed his hand on my back, rubbing slow circles, but the hollow ache in my chest didn't ease. It wasn't a pain of the body. It was deeper, hollowing. When Mark closed the door behind us, I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in my freezing hands, and like a string pulled too tight, finally snapping, I broke into sobs, not soft sobs, choking ones, the kind that makes breathing impossible. Humiliation, grief, betrayal, confusion, everything crashed over me at once. Mark sat beside me, holding on to my shoulders. "Evelyn, we don't need to stay here. I'll pack our bags. We'll leave right now. We'll go home. Forget this ever happened." I wanted to nod. I wanted to say, "Yes, let's go." But inside me was a strange emptiness, as if I had lost a part of myself, and leaving now felt like admitting my daughter had the right to hurt me without consequence. I tried to inhale, but the breath dissolved before reaching my chest. "Mark, I don't know what to do." He stroked my hair. "We'll go home. You don't need to take any more of this." I was about to answer when my phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. Ohio area code, but not saved in my contacts. Mark gestured for me not to pick up, but something, I couldn't name what, made me reach for the phone. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice rough. A young woman's shaky voice came through. someone who seemed to have struggled before deciding to call. "Mrs. Carter? Is this you? My name is Chelsea Rivera. I'm one of the event coordinators at the Linden Garden tonight." I blinked. "Chelsea? I don't think we've met." "I know," she said. I heard her swallow, then her voice quickened. "But I saw what happened at the gate. I was standing inside when they put the sign up. I'm so sorry I witnessed it and couldn't do anything." I gripped the phone, my palms dampening. "You're calling because of that?" "Not just because of that, Mrs. Carter." Her voice dropped, trembling slightly. "I'm calling because I know you're the one who paid for the entire wedding tonight." My fingers went numb. How do you know that?" I asked, my voice almost colorless. "Because I checked the contracts before the event. Every receipt, every payment record, every signature, everything has your name on it. You're the only one who paid in full. There isn't a single cent from the Whitmore family." My heart thudded so hard I pressed my hand against my chest. A long stretch of silence passed between two breaths. Chelsea continued, her voice thick with hesitation. "And there's something else you should know." I heard her swallow again, as if bracing herself. 2 hours before the ceremony, I walked past the bridal suite. I overheard the bride and the Whitmore family talking. They were talking about you. The air around me froze. "Chelsea, what did they say?" Her voice trembled, but each word stabbed like a blade. "They called you trashy and poor. They mocked you for trying to act classy. They said the wedding would be less embarrassing if you didn't show up." My knees buckled, and I sank onto the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't have any tears left. Chelsea pressed on, her voice full of pity. "I saw the bride, Madeline, smile when they talked about the no entry sign. They said it would solve the problem once and for all." Mark heard enough to rush over and hold me, but I couldn't feel his warmth. I only heard Chelsea's voice, small but sharp as broken glass. "Mrs. Carter, I can't stay quiet, not when I know the truth. You have the right to cancel the entire event, all of it, because you paid for it, and you can do it at any moment tonight." I opened my eyes. The hotel room spun around me. I have that right?" I asked, sounding like a stranger to myself. "Yes, you're the contract holder. If you request the sound to stop, the lights to go off, the service to end, we have to obey immediately." For a moment I heard nothing but the rush of blood in my ears, like waves hitting rock. And then, for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never allowed myself to feel. Power. Not the power of money, the power of truth, the power of justice. The power that comes when someone is pushed so low that standing back up becomes its own form of strength. "Mrs. Carter," Chelsea asked, "are you still there?" I placed a hand over my chest, because for the first time in months, my heart wasn't just aching, it was awakening. "Yes," I whispered, "I'm here." "Would you like me to send over the document confirming your right to terminate the event?" I looked at Mark. He was watching me as if asking, "Evelyn, what are you thinking?" But I couldn't answer him. Not yet. Not when a door inside me, one I had always kept locked, was opening wider with every second. Chelsea spoke again, her voice steady and sincere. "Mrs. Carter, I know you're a good person, but sometimes good people need protection from those who take advantage of their kindness." I inhaled slowly, and an idea, terrifying but perfectly logical, began to take shape in my mind, a thought that the version of me from a few years ago would have trembled at and pushed away immediately. But the version of me now? I had been pushed to the very edge. I had been humiliated in front of strangers. I had been stripped of my place as a mother by my own daughter. I had been trampled on by people who saw me as nothing but weeds in their lives. And now, when Chelsea spoke her final sentence, "You just have to say the word, one word," I understood that my kindness had been stepped on one time too many. I understood that some lessons can only be taught through silence, and some lessons can only be taught through action. And I, the gentle mother who had endured all her life, began to see with painful clarity the path I had to take next. No more trembling, no more weakness, only one decision, cold, rational, and entirely mine. After hanging up with Chelsea, I sat still for a long time, still enough to hear the hum of the air conditioner and the faint traffic far below. Mark sat beside me, his hand resting softly on my knee, like a thread keeping me attached to reality. But inside, I knew I had just crossed a line I could never return from. "Evelyn," Mark whispered, "what are you thinking?" I lifted my head and looked straight into his eyes. For the first time throughout this ordeal, I no longer said, "I don't know." "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that it's time she understands that actions have consequences, not through words, through the one thing she's clinging to, this wedding." Mark was silent. He didn't rush to comfort me, nor did he try to dissuade me. He simply looked at me for a long time, then nodded, heavy, reluctant. "So, what are you planning to do?" I inhaled deeply and picked up my phone. My fingers still trembled slightly, but this time out of adrenaline, not fear. I opened the contact card Chelsea had sent. The hotel manager, Mr. Harris. I made the call. The phone rang a few times before a polite middle-aged man answered. "Good evening. This is Christopher Harris, manager at the Linden Garden. How may I help you?" "This is Evelyn Carter," I said plainly, "the person listed on all contracts for tonight's wedding. I need to confirm a few things." His tone shifted immediately, becoming more careful. "Yes, of course, Mrs. Carter. I have your file right here." I heard the shuffle of papers and the tapping of a keyboard. My heart beat steadily now, not fast, not erratic. For the first time, I felt myself speaking without bowing my head, without asking for permission. "I want to know," I said clearly, "whose name appears on every contract related to tonight's wedding, the venue, decor, catering, sound, and lighting." "Let me check," Mr. Harris replied. A few seconds later, he continued, "All contracts are under your name, Mrs. Carter. Every payment we received came from your account. There is no Whitmore name on any document." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. Hearing what I already knew, but from someone with authority, made it feel heavier, more final. "In that case," I continued, "legally, the person who has the right to cancel or stop all services during the event is me, correct?" A pause, then a quiet exhale. "Under contract principles, yes, Mrs. Carter. If you request that services stop, we must comply. But I must warn you, that would cause significant disruption." "I understand," I cut in calmly. "I am not asking you to do it now. I simply need you to confirm that if I call back and request all music, service, lighting, and venue use to stop, you will do so, correct?" There was something like respect, maybe even fear in his voice when he responded, "Yes, Mrs. Carter. If you, as the paying client, request it, I will proceed. But I hope you consider this carefully." "I already have," I replied. "One more thing. I want every decision, communication, and adjustment tonight documented. Emails, internal notes, all of it must have a clear trail." "Of course," he said. We will email you a confirmation. It will state clearly that you are the one requesting service termination." "Thank you, Mr. Harris," I said, my voice low. "I may call again tonight. When I do, I expect everything to follow what you've just confirmed." "I understand, Mrs. Carter," he answered, "and I'm sorry for what happened at the gate. No mother deserves that." I didn't address the last sentence. I simply said, "Have a memorable evening," and ended the call. Mark stared at me, eyes wide. "Evelyn, you're really going to do it?" I turned to him. "Do you think I have another choice? She dragged me to the lowest point she could find. If I stay silent, I'm only teaching her that she can trample others without consequences." Mark put his arm around my shoulders. "I won't stop you. I'm only hurting because I know tonight will be the final nail in the door between you and her." I nodded softly. "That door? It's been locked for a long time, Mark. I just refuse to admit it." I straightened up and pulled my laptop closer. The light from the screen reflected off my tired, calloused hands. I opened a new email, typing with a calmness that almost frightened me. Recipient: Margaret Whitmore, Andrew's mother. Subject: regarding your family's generosity for tonight's wedding. I began. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, this is Evelyn Carter, the bride's mother. First, thank you for proudly telling everyone that your family covered all the wedding expenses. That must feel wonderful for you. Attached are all contracts, invoices, and bank payment receipts in case you'd like to refresh your memory. In case it has escaped your attention, every dollar of the $92,000 spent on tonight's wedding was paid by me. Not you, not Andrew, not anyone named Whitmore. If you'd still like to boast about your family's generosity tonight, feel free to do so, with full understanding of the truth. Sincerely, Evelyn Carter." I attached everything: hotel invoices, transfer receipts, contracts bearing my signature, even the PDF bank, statements I downloaded earlier, irrefutable. I didn't send it yet. I scheduled the email to send automatically at 8:30 p.m., just when everyone would be seated, the dinner service underway, and the Whitmores likely bragging loudly. I closed the laptop, then reopened it. There was still one more thing. I found my sister's contact, Linda Carter, the one who stood by me through the hardest years, the one Madeline erased from the guest list without hesitation. I called her. "Sis?" Linda answered after 2 rings. "I've been waiting for your call. How is everything over there?" I paused, then asked, "Are you home?" "Yes, we're all having dinner. We keep wondering how the wedding is going. I didn't want to bother you." I swallowed. "Linda, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to stay calm when you hear what I'm about to say." Her tone changed instantly. "Don't scare me. What happened?" I told her. Every detail. From paying the entire wedding cost, to Madeline cutting the whole family from the list, to the sign with our picture banning us from entering. Linda didn't speak. I heard rushed breathing, a chair scraping back, someone in her house asking, "What's wrong?" and then silence. When I finished, Linda exhaled shakily, so deeply I heard the strain in her ribs. "Sis," she whispered, her voice cracking, "please don't tell me you're still there. I'm at a hotel nearby, but Linda, I didn't call just to vent. I need you to do something." "Anything," she said immediately. "Tell me." "I need you to call every single relative Madeline erased from the list. Tell them the truth. Tell them I paid for everything. Tell them she banned her own parents at the door. Tell them she said our family serves no purpose for her future." Silence. I knew Linda was hold her back fury. "You want them to know?" she finally asked. I I said softly, that when Madeline spins her story later, our family already knows the truth. I'm not asking them to storm the wedding. I just don't want them carrying shame on my behalf anymore. Linda inhaled sharply. All right, I'll do it. I swear by tonight our whole family will know who has heart and who threw it away. Her voice softened. Sis, I'm sorry I'm not there with you right now. I gave a faint, tired smile. You are here, just in a different way. We ended the call. Staring at my phone, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. Even if Madeline cut herself off, the people who walked with me through hardship still stood firmly by my side. And tonight, I wouldn't let anyone, not even my daughter, cut that bond again. One last task remained before the moment of reckoning. I opened another file, a draft of my will I had prepared with my attorney in Ohio. I had planned to revise it after the wedding, adding Madeline more clearly as a beneficiary. Now, there was no need. I called my attorney, Mr. Jackson. Evelyn, I thought you'd be at the wedding tonight, he said, surprised. I'm still here, I replied, but something has changed. I need to revise my will immediately, at least the draft and email confirmation before Monday. He shifted into professional tone quickly. All right, tell me what you'd like to update. I spoke firmly. I want Madeline Carter removed from all inheritance. The house, savings, life insurance, my small share in the laundromat, everything. I want it reassigned to Mark and then, if Mark passes before me, transferred to a charity fund supporting older women in hardship. He paused. Are you certain, Evelyn? This is a significant decision. Tonight, I said, I received the clearest answer about what I mean to her. I'm not punishing her, Mr. Jackson. I'm simply placing her where she's chosen to be, outside the center of my life. He exhaled heavily. I'll draft the changes and send them to you for review. Come in Monday for final signatures. Thank you, I said, and please keep this confidential. Of course, he replied. Evelyn, this isn't cruelty. Sometimes protecting yourself is a form of love too, painful as it is. I closed the laptop. The hotel room felt like a temporary fortress, a place where I was gathering the scattered pieces of my dignity and rebuilding them into one final barrier. Mark had watched everything silently. He didn't interrupt, didn't protest. He sat at the edge of the bed, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Mark, I turned to him, if I go through with this, will you resent me? He looked at me for a long moment. His tired eyes were sincere. I've watched you endure more than any woman I know. If tonight is the night you stand up for yourself, I will stand with you. I hurt for her, but I hurt for you far more. I rested my head on his shoulder. Tonight, Madeline's life will change. And so will ours, Mark murmured. In a way, we'll both be freed. I opened my laptop again, not to send more messages or make more calls. I went into my storage folder and gathered every piece of evidence: contracts, invoices, bank statements, screenshots of messages, the email confirmation with the hotel, the new will draft. I placed them all into one folder named Truth. I copied it onto a small silver USB drive I always kept in my purse, then uploaded a duplicate to a private email account meant only for backups. If one day I was no longer here, there would still be enough truth to silence any lies. When everything was finally in place, I looked at the clock. 7:50 p.m. Surely by now, Madeline was standing in the ceremony hall, her hand in Andrew's, smiling in front of 300 guests, believing tonight was the most perfect night of her life, believing she had completely removed two poor nobodies from the flawless picture she wanted to present. She didn't know, couldn't even imagine, that every light above her, every piece of music playing, every chair she and her groom sat on, all depended on one phone call from the mother whose photo she had just posted at the entrance with a ban. And tonight, I would make her understand something she had never learned in her entire life. No one can build their happiness on humiliating the person who gave birth to them and raised them without paying a price. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Then I opened them again, staring straight at my phone screen, where Mr. Harris's number still sat in my call history. I didn't call right away. I left a pause for myself to confirm one last time that this wasn't from impulse or anger. This was the decision of a woman pushed to her final limits, who had thought, endured, forgiven far too many times, and was now choosing to stand on her own side. When that pause ended, I knew it was time. I tightened my grip on the phone and waited for the perfect moment to destroy the wedding I had spent my entire life paying for, only to receive the rawest betrayal in return. Chelsea sent the update just as the clock struck 8:10. "They're all seated, Mrs. Carter. The appetizers will be brought out in a few minutes." Her voice was small but full of meaning. I understood. This was the exact right moment. I set the phone down for a moment. Mark was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, silently looking down at the dim parking lot. When I walked toward him, he turned, his eyes heavy but steady. "Evelyn, are you sure?" I didn't answer with words. I simply took his hand. That hand had guided me through so many hardships, but tonight it became the support I needed to walk into the most decisive moment of my life as a mother. I pressed the call button. Mr. Harris picked up immediately, as if he had been waiting for every second. "Mrs. Carter?" I drew a deep breath. "It's time." No questions, just one crisp reply. "Yes, ma'am. We'll proceed immediately." I set the phone down. Inside me, a strange emptiness spread. A feeling like closing a door that had been open for decades, a door I had never believed I would have the courage to shut. Only a few minutes later, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Chelsea texted, "The sound is off. Everyone is confused. The bride is looking around, panicking." I closed my eyes, imagining the scene inside the venue. The main hall of the Linden Garden, once glowing with warm golden lights, soft background music, elegant table settings, was now swallowed by sudden silence. More than 300 guests, business people, the Whitmore family's partners, friends, relatives from far away, all lifted their heads, looking around, not understanding what was happening. Some laughed, thinking it was part of a performance. Others whispered, irritation clearly on their faces. Then the second text arrived. "The decorative lights are off. Only the emergency lights are on. People are standing up, chaotic." I opened my eyes. Mark watched me, his face reflecting the dim light from my phone. "It started," I whispered. In my mind, I pictured the bright lights going out row by row. From the ceiling down the sides of the hall, the sparkling strings of lights, the ones Madeline had said must look cinematic, now nothing more than dark pieces of glass. Under the cold white glow of emergency lighting, everyone's panic was more visible. Unease seeped into every whisper. These guests, so used to polished, high-class events, were now looking at each other with confusion and irritation. Chelsea texted, "The staff have stopped service. They're all standing still on command. No appetizers are going out." I pictured the young waitstaff in their neat black and white uniforms, standing frozen like statues. No smiles, no polite bows, no champagne refills. And in a luxury wedding, that alone was a loud signal that something enormous was happening. An older guest likely lost patience, standing up and shouting, "What is going on? Get the manager here immediately!" Chairs scraped, voices rose, heels clicked on tile, a storm of noise swelling in the hall, all surging toward Madeline, my daughter, standing in the center like someone stripped of her crown in front of everyone. Chelsea's fourth text came, "Madeline is standing in the center, pale. She's asking the staff who authorized this. No one is answering." I could imagine her face. The same daughter who once beamed with joy on her college graduation day, who once ran to hug me when she got her first job. Now trembling, eyes wide with terror. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand, because she believed power and wealth were what controlled the world. She forgot one thing. Tonight, every glass, every rose, every strip of silk was paid for with my money. The fifth message arrived, longer. "Andrew is yelling at the staff. He says he'll call his lawyer. But Manager Harris just walked in. He showed Andrew the contract and pointed at the name, yours." I stared at the screen, unusually calm. Some truths don't require shouting, just a signature. I pictured Andrew grabbing the contract, reading my name on every page, then perhaps looking around, searching for backup from his family. But the truth was too clear, too sharp, leaving no one able to save him from the humiliation spreading across the hall like spilled oil. Then Chelsea sent, "Mrs. Whitmore, she opened your email." I sat upright. My heart beat lightly but steadily, no twisting pain now. Mark leaned toward me, almost holding his breath. Then the final message in that sequence appeared. "She's frozen. Her hands are shaking. Her face is white. People beside her are asking what's wrong." She handed her phone to her husband. He looked at it, then looked at Andrew, like he wants to crush him. I exhaled, a long breath I had been holding for weeks. The Whitmore family, who mocked me, looked down on me, orchestrated my humiliation at the gate, lost their dignity in just a few minutes. I didn't feel triumphant. Truly, I didn't feel joy reading those texts. What rose inside me wasn't arrogant victory, but deep relief. Like finally, the truth had been forced to speak after being buried so long. I imagined Margaret Whitmore standing at her table, hands shaking, reading each invoice, each contract I sent. Every paid by Evelyn Carter, cutting into her pride like cold metal. I imagined Andrew turning to the bride, my daughter, just as stunned. His pride ripped away in front of 300 people. And I knew, at that very moment, the Whitmores finally understood something they never expected. The woman they humiliated was the only reason they had the wedding that was now falling apart before their eyes. Then Chelsea texted a sentence that made my hand pause above the screen. "Madeline is crying. She's asking, who did this?" I stared at the words, my heart tightening. My daughter was crying. That moment didn't make me waver, but it did bring a sharp ache to the part of me that was still a mother. I had given birth to her. I had raised her through the hardest years. And now I was the one pulling the cloth off the truth at the wedding she treated as her life's dream. But I didn't regret it. I had been silent too long. I had let her believe there were no consequences. I had let myself be treated as an extra in the life I built for her. If tonight she had to stand under cold emergency lighting, facing 300 questioning eyes, then that was the only lesson she would listen to. I put the phone down. Mark squeezed my shoulder. "Are you all right?" I nodded, and for the first time my eyes were no longer wet. All right. For the first time. Truly all right. Outside the window, the lights of Ohio shimmered like quiet dots, as if reminding me that life was bigger than the pain Madeline caused. And in that rare moment, I knew. The storm I unleashed wasn't to destroy her. It was to let her see what she had lost by letting arrogance lead her. Tonight the lights at the wedding went out, but the light inside me, for the first time in a long while, turned back on. I was sitting at the edge of the bed, my heart settling like calm water after the strongest wind of my life, when my phone vibrated violently. The screen lit up with the caller's name, Madeline. I stared at it for a long time. Mark stood behind me, his eyes gentle but sad, as if he knew exactly what I was about to face. When I pressed answer, I heard my daughter's ragged breaths, the chaotic noise behind her, people shouting, management being called, chairs scraping. Then Madeline burst into tears, sobbing, Mom, please help me." I closed my eyes, not from pain, but because I realized I had been waiting for this call, not out of satisfaction, but out of closure. "Madeline," I said, my voice strangely calm, "there's nothing to save." It was as if she had been struck in the chest. "What do you mean?" A minute ago, everything was normal. Then suddenly, the lights went off, the staff left, the email came. Everyone is looking at me like you lied to them, I said. Like you made up a story about your in-laws' generosity. Like you turned your own mother into a poor maid to be kept outside the gate. Madeline sniffled, her voice shrinking. "Mom, I didn't think it would end up like this. I just wanted everything to look perfect. The Whitmore family, they have very high standards, and I spoke softly, but not gently. You put their standards above your own family, above your parents, above the mother who kept you alive through the hardest years of your life." Silence, only her quiet sobbing. I continued, "Madeline, do you remember you told me to cut all our relatives because they did nothing for your future? You banned us from the ceremony area to preserve the image. You allowed them to hang a sign banning your own parents at the entrance." "No. Mom, you also said," I emphasized, "that you were ashamed people would know your mother once worked at a laundromat. Do you remember that?" Madeline's breath hitched, like she couldn't get air. I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said, "and you never apologized." Behind her voice, I heard someone yank the phone. Andrew's voice exploded, angry and arrogant. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You ruined our wedding, you—" "No," I cut in, my voice calm to the point of being cold. "I only turned off the things I paid for, the things your family took credit for without paying a single cent." "You're insane," Andrew yelled. "You'll pay for this. I'll sue you for causing serious damages." I laughed softly, a thin paper-like sound. It silenced him for several seconds. "Sue me?" I asked. "You're going to sue me because I turned off the sound, the lights, and the service at the wedding I paid for." Do you want to review the contract, Andrew? My name is on every line. I paid every invoice. I have the right to stop everything at any moment. And I spoke slowly. I also have audio files of you bragging to your friends that your family paid for everything, that the bride's side is dirt poor. I heard Andrew choke up, then the sound of him muttering a curse. You will pay for this." "No," I said. "My daughter is the one who will pay, not me." Madeline grabbed the phone back, breathing hard like she had been running, her voice shaking violently. "Mom, please stop. I'm begging you." That plea, if it had been 2 weeks earlier, I might have burst into tears. But now I saw one very clear truth. She only begged when she was exposed, not when she did wrong. "Madeline, I said, my voice lowering, almost a whisper. Today, I did not ruin your wedding. You ruined it yourself. You belittled your parents. You deceived your guests. You built your dream on humiliating the people who raised you, and you thought you would never have to pay for it. Mom, please. Don't say that. This, I said, is a lesson about consequences. You can hate me for the rest of your life, but you will never forget tonight. Behind her, I heard hundreds of guests murmuring, people calling for staff, Mrs. Whitmore raising her voice at someone, Andrew slamming his hand on a table. Everything, like the distant echo of a world I had just stepped out of and had no intention of returning to. Madeline sobbed so hard she could barely form words. I need you. Right now, I don't know what to do. You did not need me, I said. When you erased me from your life, when you hung that sign, when you were ashamed of where you came from, so now you must stand on your own feet. Mom, I closed my eyes and said the final sentence I knew would carve itself into this night like a cut. I cannot save someone who does not want to save herself. I lowered the phone from my ear. Mom! Her voice cracked with panic. Don't hang up. I'm begging you. I didn't let her finish. I pressed the end call button. The screen returned to silence. But I didn't stop there. I opened settings and blocked all calls and messages from Madeline, from Andrew, and from the entire Whitmore family. When I set the phone down, I felt Mark place his hand on my back. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed my shoulder. A squeeze strong enough to tell me I wasn't alone. That night, for the first time in many years, I pulled the blanket over myself and laid my head on the pillow without feeling my heart sink. I didn't toss and turn, replaying painful words in my head. I didn't think about the sign at the gate. I didn't think about Madeline's face. I didn't think about the chaos at the party. I only thought one thing. At last, I had stepped out of the cycle of endurance that once felt endless, and I slept. A deep, peaceful sleep without dreams, without heaviness. The best sleep I had had in many years. 6 months passed since that night the lights went out. A night I still remember in every detail, not because of pain, but because it marked the moment I walked out of a life I had trapped myself in for far too long. Time didn't blur the memory. Instead, it revealed the truth of everything, especially of people. Rumors about the failed wedding spread faster than anything I had ever seen. In the first weeks, a local paper even ran a mocking piece about a luxurious wedding plunged into darkness, though they didn't know half the truth behind it. Guests traded stories in half-whispered loops, and the Whitmore name, once their badge of honor, started being spoken with disdain. In the local business community, their reputation nearly collapsed. The gossip circled around how they borrowed prestige, showed off, and lived off someone else's money. Andrew's mother, Margaret, who once walked into every event with the arrogance of someone who owned the room, now appeared far less often. And when she did, people said she bowed her head more than she lifted it. I didn't feel triumphant hearing any of this. Every downfall has its own cost, and I never wished for others to pay just so I could be happy. But I understood that some lessons in life are only learned through loss. As for Madeline and Andrew, they were still married. The wedding became a joke, but the marriage license was still valid. Yet their lives were nothing like the luxury they once imagined. The Whitmore family cut off all financial support, blaming the wedding scandal for embarrassing them. Andrew lost some key partners. With his reputation stained, he walked into meetings with a much lower posture than before. No one said it outright, but they understood. A man who cannot stand on his own will never earn real respect. Madeline, from what I heard, struggled to keep even a sliver of her image in her husband's family. She had to start working earlier than she planned. She had to track expenses, measure every part of their budget. No more fancy dinners, no more expensive clothing, no more luxury weekend trips, and no more respect from the Whitmores. The same people who once praised her when she first met Andrew now looked at her like an outsider. They saw her as the faint shadow of a mistake. And Madeline tried to hold herself together, but she grew more worn and frail by the day. One early June afternoon, with summer wind blowing across the porch, I was watering my pots of sunflowers when I heard a car stop at the gate. Mark was in his office. Only I stepped out. A worn sedan door opened, and Madeline got out. She had noticeably lost weight. Her once shiny blonde hair was dry and split, tied in a rush. Her clothes were no longer the elaborate style she used to prefer. Her face carried dark circles, her eyes tired as though she had cried through many nights. She stood at the gate looking at me like someone staring at a stranger she no longer knew how to approach. "Mom," her voice was hoarse, "can you come outside and talk to me for a moment?" I opened the gate but held my distance, not coldly but enough for her to know the past could not be erased like chalk. Madeline burst into tears immediately, as if my presence alone unlocked everything she had held back for months. "Mom, I'm sorry. I can't take it anymore." She fell to her knees right on the gravel path, burying her face in her hands. "I lost everything. Everything. I have no one to talk to. I have no one on my side anymore. Please, Mom, forgive me. I need you." I leaned down and set my hand lightly on her shoulder, but didn't rush to comfort her. "Madeline," I said slowly, "you didn't lose me. You only lost the right to assume I would endure forever." She looked up, her red eyes filled with hope. "Mom, I'll do anything. I just need you to hold me, just once." My heart ached with the instinct of a mother. I had wilted for years out of fear of losing her, but today I understood something else. Love does not mean allowing someone to hurt you endlessly. Sometimes love means standing far enough away for them to see their own mistakes. "Madeline," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't something people receive by asking. Forgiveness is something they earn through action. I'm not closing the door on you, but I won't open it all the way just because of a tearful apology." She went still. In the past, whenever I spoke gently, Madeline often answered with a pout or an irritated tone, but today she only bowed her head. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll come back when I deserve to." She stood, wiped her tears with her sleeve, and as she walked away, her figure shrinking down the familiar road, she looked like a child realizing for the first time that the world did not revolve around her. 1 month after that, Mark and I sold the business. The laundromat that had been our family's livelihood for 30 years had become a symbol of the life I had stepped out of. We sold it to a sweet young couple who promised to keep the shop's name out of respect for the generations who built it. With the money, we moved into a small home near the beaches of North Carolina. The sound of waves every evening made me feel as though I was getting back breaths that life had taken from me for too long. I met with my lawyer again. This time, not in pain or anger, but clarity. The new will was adjusted. All assets would be transferred to a fund supporting older women seeking independence after leaving toxic families. Not a single dollar would go to Madeline, unless she proved through time and consistent action that she had changed. Mr. Jackson nodded after reading it. "Evelyn, this is not the decision of a cold mother. This is the decision of someone who finally knows how to love in the right way. I knew he was right. The most surprising part was what happened after everything fell apart. My family, the same people Madeline erased from her guest list, returned to me more than ever. Linda called me every week. The little nieces and nephews sent hand-drawn letters of the ocean, asking when they could visit. Old friends stopped by, filling the house with laughter. And I realized that the people who truly loved me had never left. I had simply been blinded by the love I poured into a child who didn't value it. One evening, Mark and I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink into the sea, the deep orange fading into soft purple. Mark said, "Do you feel lighter now?" I nodded. Not just lighter, I feel free. For the first time in years. Free from expectations, free from the fear of losing my child, free from feeling I had to be endlessly good just to be loved, free to live the life I spent too many years building for others. And as the ocean breeze brushed past me, I closed my eyes and smiled, not because the past was beautiful, but because I knew I had stepped into the most beautiful part of my own life. From the porch overlooking the sea each evening, I realize life has moments that force us to look deeply at ourselves. I once believed that if I loved my child unconditionally, every wound could be forgiven. But love without respect is just a shackle wrapped in pretty paper. It makes us forget ourselves, shrink ourselves, sacrifice until we break, and still never be enough. I spent too many years living that way. Now looking back, I understand that leaving someone you love is not always the absence of love. Sometimes it is the only way to save yourself from drowning. It hurts, yes, but not every pain is bad. Some pain opens a door. And for me, that door was the night the wedding lights went out. Since the day Madeline came begging for forgiveness and then quietly left, I haven't received another call or message. But strangely, my heart no longer waits, no longer hopes for an explanation, no longer hopes for anything that might drag me back into the fragile woman I used to be. Some relationships can only heal when both sides try. If only one side looks back, apologizes, or repairs. That is not family. That is a spiral of exhaustion. I do not hate Madeline. Even though I close the door, my heart still hopes that someday, not through tears or apologies, but through long-term change and real actions, she will show me she's grown. But if that day never comes, I will not hurt anymore. I have already saved myself. Now every morning I walk along the beach, picking up a few shells still wet from the tide, listening to the waves like a lullaby from a new life. In the afternoon, I sit at the nearby community center, talking with older women trapped in toxic families, women who were once versions of me. I listen to them cry, then quietly offer them the courage I paid a very high price to find. I realized that the most meaningful thing in my life wasn't paying for a wedding or putting my child through college, but helping other women see their worth. The thing I once desperately wished someone would help me see. Anyone who writes, leaves a message, or asks me to share my story, I read everything. Each note reminds me I am not alone, and none of us ever truly are. Family. I learned this far too late, but just in time, is not necessarily made of blood. Family is the people who stay when you fall. Family is the ones who never make you feel small. Family is the ones who speak your name with kindness, not contempt. And now, as you sit somewhere listening to this story, I want to ask you something sincere. Where are you listening from? And have you ever felt overlooked by your own family or had to stand up to protect your dignity? If you have, I hope you leave a few words in the comments, not for me, but for the other women who read them, the ones still suffering silently so they know they are not alone. Thank you, truly thank you, for being here, for listening to the journey of an ordinary mother like me. Every minute you spend with this story matters to me more than you can imagine. And if you want to continue walking with me with stories about the quiet strength of middle-aged and older women, then please follow the channel and leave a like. It isn't an obligation. It's simply a way of saying you're still here and that stories of healing like this still have a place in your heart. Thank you for staying with me to the end. I wish you peace, and I hope you too will find your own freedom. Don't step inside. Get out of here now. Rosa, the housekeeper, rushed toward me and grabbed my arm just as I set foot on my daughter's front steps. Her face had gone pale, as if she'd just seen death itself. I froze, my heart pounding, unable to understand what was happening in the very house I had once helped my daughter pay half the mortgage for. I opened my mouth to ask, but she backed away, glancing toward the door as though terrified someone might hear. If you stay here one more minute, you won't have a chance to walk out of this place. I stepped back toward my car, but instead of leaving, I turned off the lights, lowered my seat, and watched. And then, what I saw through the dining room window made everything inside me collapse. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Caroline Mercer, and I'm 57 years old. Just a few hours before hearing that terrifying warning, I had believed today would be the best day I'd had in an entire year. A long, agonizing year of silence, unanswered calls, messages slipping into the void like pain tossed into a dark sky. It all began with a text message, one short line that shattered every bit of emotional armor I'd built over the past year. Mom, can we have dinner together next Thursday? I miss you. Grace, my only daughter, the child who used to hug me every night, who once said I was the best friend in the world, who cried when she left for college, yet suddenly disappeared from my life one day as if I had never existed. No argument, no clear reason, just distance widening day after day, unread messages, declined calls. Layer after layer, my daughter slowly slipped from my hands into a world I could no longer reach. A world where Landon Reeves, her husband, controlled every door. And yet that day, my phone buzzed, and with one message, all the pain and hope rushed back into me in the cruelest way. I read that message dozens of times, each time my heart beat harder. I told myself, maybe she really misses me. Maybe she finally realized her mother never did anything wrong. Maybe everything can start over. So I prepared. Too much, honestly, for an ordinary dinner. I changed clothes 5 times, checked the mirror a dozen more. I decided to wear the light blue sweater Grace gave me 3 years ago. The last Christmas, we were truly mother and daughter. Driving into Grace's upscale neighborhood, Snow Pine Estates on the outskirts of Denver, my heart fluttered like a woman on her first date in decades. But the moment I parked, I sensed something was off. The front yard was bare, no longer filled with the hydrangeas we planted together when Grace first moved in. The porch light was dimmer than usual. There was no sense of home, no warmth at all, only a cold emptiness like a frozen lake. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my wind-tousled hair, and took a deep breath to steady myself. I was about to attend our first reconciliation dinner after a year of estrangement. I had rehearsed a simple line for days. "Grace, I'm glad you texted me." But before I could use it, Rosa came running. Her sudden yank nearly knocked me off balance. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven. I had never seen her like this. Rosa was always calm, gentle, someone who cared for Grace as if she were her own child. What she said wasn't just a warning. It was a plea. When she rushed back inside, her shoulders shaking as though afraid of being seen, a cold shiver ran the length of my spine. I returned to my car, shut the door, and locked it. But instead of driving away, I turned off all the lights, slid low in my seat, and peered through the narrow gap where the curtains didn't cover the window. At first, nothing. The house was dark, unnervingly still, but then, almost as if someone had waited for me to leave, lights flickered on room by room. Each window lit up like the opening scene of a carefully staged play. A man in a black suit appeared in the dining room, then a woman holding a folder, and then Landon walked in. One glance was enough to recognize that arrogant stride. He talked on the phone, pacing like he was leading a strategic briefing, but the cruelest part had yet to come. Grace stepped inside moments later, my daughter, her face unrecognizable, no smile, no warmth, only a chilling emptiness. She looked at the stack of papers on the table and signed them. No hesitation, no doubt. My heart clenched painfully, a year of absolute silence from her, no explanation, and now, signing documents? For whom? For what purpose? Was I dreaming? I leaned forward against the steering wheel, fighting the urge to sob. A familiar instinct suddenly surged back, one I thought I had buried long ago. The instinct of someone who spent 15 years living inside a violent marriage. Someone who had learned to sense danger the moment it entered the room. That instinct was screaming inside my head now. This wasn't a reconciliation dinner. This wasn't a daughter reaching out. This wasn't healing. This was a plan, a private meeting. And strangely, it had only started once I supposedly left, but I hadn't left. I was still there, and Landon looked straight toward me. I ducked down reflexively, my heart pounding like a drum. When I glanced again seconds later, the curtains had been pulled shut. The house vanished behind thick gray fabric, as if they knew I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't sit there anymore. I started the engine and drove away, my hands trembling so hard I struggled to keep the wheel steady. But leaving that house didn't bring relief. If anything, as the streetlights blurred into streaks of white outside my window, I realized I had just stepped into the biggest storm of my life. And one question stabbed through my mind over and over: was Grace being coerced? Or was my own daughter silently participating in a scheme against me? I drove away from Grace's neighborhood in a daze, as if everything I had just witnessed were a nightmare that hadn't finished unfolding. It wasn't until the glow of a gas station appeared on the right that I finally pulled in. I parked, lowered the window to let the night air in, hoping it would loosen the tightness in my chest. The smell of gasoline, the hiss of automated doors, the harsh white lights, all painfully ordinary. Meanwhile, I was shaking, trying to piece together what I'd just seen into something that made sense. I placed both hands on the wheel, but they wouldn't stop trembling. The air in the car felt heavy, almost suffocating. I tried recalling Grace's expression as she signed those papers, cold, hollow. Not the face of the daughter I raised for more than 20 years. Not the child who once gave me a Mother's Day card with trembling handwriting. "Mom, you are my safe place." Tears threatened, but my throat locked tight. My phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. "It's me, Rosa. Don't go back to the house. Don't tell anyone. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the cafe inside the central station. Important." The word important sent a chill through me. I read it again, then tucked my phone inside the chest pocket of my jacket, afraid it might vanish if I put it anywhere else. Driving home, every street sign, every familiar corner felt strangely distant. I unlocked my apartment, stepped into my quiet living room, yet the unease followed me inside like a shadow. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair by the window, staring at the city lights. Skyscrapers glowing gold, cars moving slowly along the freeway, lives continuing as usual while mine felt like it had been yanked off its axis. I imagined countless scenarios, Grace being pressured, Grace being deceived, or Grace truly believing the things Landon had told her. That possibility hurt more than my divorce ever did. I could recognize violence, I could fight against lies, but my own daughter believing I was toxic, that was a wound with no bandage. I remembered her freshman year of college, a whole week without calling. When I visited unannounced, she hugged me and cried from academic stress. A simple touch from me eased her breathing. But after she married Landon, everything changed. At first, subtly, vague excuses Grace made. We're busy. It's not a good time to talk. I'm just living my own life, Mom. I didn't realize it then, but each line was a step away from me. The day Grace got married, she looked beautiful, glowing, and Landon never let go of her waist, gripping her like he owned her. I didn't like that hand from the start. It was too tight, too possessive. But I told myself, Caroline, don't judge. He's the man your daughter loves. A year later, Grace was visibly thinner. Her close friends drifted away. My calls grew shorter, whispers from her that she was tired, that she was fine, and don't worry. But her voice said otherwise. Now looking back, every sign was painfully obvious. The next day, I met Rosa at the Central Bus Station Cafe, a crowded place where no one noticed anyone else. I arrived 20 minutes early, sitting near the window, watching people hurry by. My hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I couldn't drink. Rosa arrived exactly at noon. She wore a knit hat and a dark scarf, her small frame tense as her eyes darted around the room. When she spotted me, her shoulders sagged with relief. She sat down and took my hands. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm so sorry I didn't speak sooner." I didn't have time to respond before she lowered her voice, scanning the room again. Mr. Landon controls everything, every meal, every call, every person Grace is allowed to meet, even what she thinks. My eyes widened. Rosa explained it piece by piece. How Landon dictated Grace's diet, forcing her to stay on harsh regimens though she was already slim. How he checked her phone every morning. How he insisted she sleep 8 hours, not for her health, but to keep her from seeing anyone. And worst of all, he convinced her you're the problem, that you want to ruin their life, that you're jealous. I clenched my fist, trying to keep my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was being beaten from the inside. Grace believes that? Rosa looked down. She doesn't know what to believe anymore. Everything she hears comes from one person. A long, uncomfortable silence followed. I heard rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, a crying child, all muffled, like they belonged to a world far from mine. Then Rosa said the words that shattered me. He needs your signature. For the old house. For the shares her father left her. He said once he gets your signature, everything will be done. The room tilted. I gripped the table so I wouldn't fall. But Rosa wasn't finished. Her voice shook now. Yesterday, I overheard them. That dinner wasn't about reconciliation. They planned to create an accident so you wouldn't be able to interfere. I looked into Rosa's frightened eyes. And all I could think about was Grace. Grace, my daughter. Grace, the child who held my hand on the first day of school. Grace, who once believed no one loved her more than her mother. Did she know? Was she being coerced? Or had she been manipulated into believing my death would make her life easier? I couldn't breathe. I had to inhale deeply 3 times just to stop myself from crying out in pain. The room blurred like someone had splashed water across a painting. One thing became painfully clear. If I didn't act, I would lose my daughter. Forever. Rosa opened her bag and pulled out a thick envelope wrapped in 2 layers of paper. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. I opened it, and the first thing I saw was a stack of documents bearing my signature. My signature, but not mine. The loops were too long. The ending stroke dragged out. One glance, and I knew they were forged. "There are also ones with Miss Grace's," Rosa whispered. I turned the pages. Grace's signatures looked disturbingly real, but I knew my daughter's handwriting. She always tilted the G slightly upward, writing quickly and neatly. These signatures were slow, cautious, copied strokes. A small audio recorder slid out of the envelope. I pressed play, my hand gripping the table. Landon's voice, low, calculated. "All we need is her signature. Grace's mother won't question anything if it all looks natural. We can't let her get in the way." Rosa swallowed hard. I heard it while taking the trash out behind the yard. I couldn't speak anymore. Not because I was shocked, but because I was holding myself together so I wouldn't fall apart in public. Part of me wanted to run, grab Grace and drag her away from that man. But the part of me that survived 15 years of abuse knew impulsiveness would only make us both targets. "We could take this to the police," Rosa whispered, almost pleading. I met her eyes. "We can't. Not yet." Landon had wide connections in the city. He wasn't famous, but his father had once been chairman of the local Chamber of Commerce, a man with significant influence. A formal report could be diluted or, worse, turned into evidence against me. If I handed over what Rosa gave me to the police right now, there was a high chance I'd be labeled as a family disruptor before anyone bothered to look at the truth. I needed someone I could trust. And only one name came to mind: Harold Bishop, an old friend from college, now an attorney specializing in asset disputes and fraud. Harold was a quiet, straightforward man, and most importantly, he had no ties whatsoever to Landon's family. Right there in the cafe, I called Harold. His voice came through after 2 rings. "Caroline, it's been years. Are you all right?" "No, Harold, I think I'm in danger." The moment I said it out loud, my throat tightened. I had never spoken those words before. And once I did, the fear stopped being hypothetical and became real. I briefly explained what Rosa had revealed. Harold fell silent for a long moment, the only sound being the rustle of papers in his office. Then he said, "Listen to me carefully. Your old documents, the ones related to your previous home and the shares your late husband left, where are they?" "In a green folder, inside the safe under my desk." Harold lowered his voice, so serious it sent a shiver through me. "That is the only evidence protecting you right now. And Caroline, do not go home alone. I'm coming to meet you. Do not hang up." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. After we ended the call, I thanked Rosa and told her to go home using different routes to avoid anyone tracing our meeting. I left the central station feeling as if I were walking between 2 worlds. The world I once knew, peaceful, stable, and the world of shadows slowly swallowing me. By the time my car stopped in front of my apartment, Harold was already there waiting, but he wasn't standing normally. He was pressed against the doorframe, staring at me with a face nearly drained of color. "Caroline, your apartment was ransacked." My knees nearly gave out. We walked in together. The door hadn't been forced. Someone had either used a key or knew how to work the smart lock without leaving a trace. Inside was a scene I never imagined I would witness in my own life. The safe under my desk was wide open, drawers pulled out, papers scattered as if someone had been searching for something valuable. But the only thing missing was the green folder. I held my head in my hands, standing in the middle of the wrecked living room. Harold handed me a glass of water, speaking in a calming voice. "You need to stay composed. Someone knew you kept those documents, but they don't know I made partial copies earlier. I'll send them to you immediately." I stared at him, stunned. How did they know? Harold didn't hesitate. Grace didn't tell him, but Landon could guess. He's smart enough to understand that you would always hold on to evidence related to your and your daughter's assets. I barely had time to process his words when my phone rang. It was the library where I worked part-time. "Ms. Mercer, we just received an anonymous report accusing you of financial misconduct while overseeing the library's donation fund." My legs went weak. I almost dropped the phone. I've never done that," I stammered. "We know, but by policy, we must place you on temporary suspension while we investigate." I hung up and looked at Harold with a face drained of expression. "Caroline," he said slowly, "they're building a narrative that you are unstable, greedy, and dishonest. By the time you report them, no one will believe you." I couldn't find words. I felt myself being pushed into a corner by an invisible but powerful hand. Landon's hand. The phone buzzed again. A message from Rosa. "They mentioned Plan B. It's not just about the assets. It's about Grace." My head felt like it exploded. I read it over and over, each word cutting into my skin. Plan B, not me, but Grace. I looked at Harold, my voice trembling uncontrollably. Where do they plan to take Grace? Harold looked at me carefully, choosing his words. "Caroline, I've heard Landon has financial dealings with an overseas partner. If he gets Grace out of the country before you act, we won't be able to find her again." The room spun. My breathing seized. On one hand, I knew that if I stayed involved, my life could be in danger. On the other hand, if I did nothing, Grace would disappear from my life forever. In that moment, I knew I had only two choices: run to save myself or fight, even if it meant risking everything. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had survived domestic violence. I had rebuilt my life from nothing. I was not giving up this time, not when my daughter was being swallowed by darkness. I left my ransacked apartment that very night without packing clothes or taking anything familiar. Harold told me to drive straight to my cousin's house in the Santa Fe area, a remote place, quiet, and most importantly, unknown to anyone connected to Landon. As I drove, the low mountain ranges appeared under the pale moonlight, stretching like a fragile curtain between me and the world Landon was trying to control. When I arrived, my cousin Sylvia's small wooden house stood beneath an old birch tree. The warm porch light nearly brought me to tears. I had grown used to feeling hunted, but being greeted by someone, even a distant relative, reminded me I still had places where I belonged. Sylvia looked me over and asked just one gentle question. "How long?" "A few days," I said softly. "Maybe longer." She nodded immediately, as if she had always expected something like this. "You're safe here. Rest. Talk tomorrow." But I knew I couldn't sleep. After a bowl of warm soup, I sat alone at the small wooden table by the window, replaying the audio files and examining each forged document Rosa had given me. Signatures, fake transfers, carefully fabricated records so precise they made my skin crawl. In that quiet Santa Fe room, I finally saw the situation from enough distance to understand that this wasn't just a broken family matter. It was an orchestrated plan, structured and deliberate, crafted by a man skilled in manipulation. The next morning, Harold arrived in Santa Fe. With him were two people he said would become critical allies: Troy Callahan, a retired detective who had handled domestic abuse cases, and Dr. Evelyn Moore, a specialist in coercive control and trauma bonding. From the moment I saw them, I knew I was no longer facing this storm alone. Troy entered with the presence of a man who had seen far too much darkness, but still carried compassion in his eyes. He didn't shake my hand. He simply looked at me and said, "Mrs. Mercer, I've heard everything, and I want you to understand something right now. You're not imagining this. It's real." That sentence alone eased half my burden. Evelyn was different, gentle, grounded, with eyes that seemed to read through every defense. When I described how Grace changed, her weight loss, her fear of answering the phone, her avoidance of friends, her constant anxiety, Evelyn nodded as if hearing a familiar story. "That's coercive control," she explained. "Not physical abuse, but far more damaging. The victim loses willpower, loses the ability to distinguish truth from manipulation, and becomes completely dependent on the abuser." I clenched my hands. But Grace is smart. She's been strong since she was little. Evelyn placed her hand on the table and said firmly, "Intelligence doesn't shield anyone from a skilled manipulator. In fact, intelligent people are often targeted because they know how to endure, rationalize, and silence their own doubts." A heavy silence filled the room. Troy stood up, arms crossed. "If Landon is preparing to take Grace out of the country, we don't have much time." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "If he crosses a border with her, no one can demand extradition. Without evidence, without legal jurisdiction, she'll disappear from the United States and from your life." I felt myself turn to stone. I had feared it, but hearing it aloud made it undeniable. Harold spread a map on the table. "We need a plan. We can't wait for him to move first." I looked at these three people, strangers technically, giving their time, expertise, and safety for me and for a young woman they'd never met. Gratitude nearly overwhelmed me. Troy outlined the plan. His only weak point is his work schedule. Landon travels once a month. If we know his next trip, we get a window of a few hours. The only time Grace won't be monitored closely. I remembered Rosa's words. "He's flying to Phoenix next week. Board meeting." Troy circled the date. "Good. That's when we move." But the tasks ahead were daunting. Rosa would monitor the inside and alert us when Landon left. Harold would handle legal preparation and federal contact if needed. Troy would secure the home and guide the extraction. Evelyn would make first contact with Grace, easing her panic and helping her see the truth. When Evelyn described her role, I asked, "Will Grace trust you?" Evelyn gave a sad, soft smile. "Trust isn't required. What matters is breaking the mental loop he built. A few minutes without him in the room can create an opening." On paper, the plan looked simple. In reality, we all knew one mistake could ruin everything. I swallowed hard. What if we fail? Troy didn't hesitate. Failure isn't an option. We're rescuing someone trapped in a violent dynamic. We won't let anyone get dragged out of this country like property. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. Caroline, when we step in, we're not just helping you. We're saving a life. That sentence made my knees weak. Grace, my baby, the child I held in my arms when she was 3 days old, now needed a rescue like a hostage. Evelyn looked at me. Prepare yourself emotionally. When we find Grace, she might resist. She might blame you or deny everything. That's normal when a victim is separated from their controller. I inhaled deeply. As long as she's alive, I can endure anything. After they left to prepare, I remained on Sylvia's porch, watching the Santa Fe sky dim behind the hills. The air was peaceful, yet I felt the weight of how narrowly I stood between saving my daughter and losing her forever. That night, Sylvia placed a warm hand on my shoulder. Don't fall apart, Carolyn. I know you. You don't give up. Later, I stepped outside into the cold night air. The wind smelled faintly of distant snow. I looked toward Denver, toward Grace, and whispered into the dark, Grace, I'm coming. Don't be afraid. Don't let go. I will get you out of there, whatever it takes. And just like that, the countdown to the biggest battle of my life began. Rosa messaged exactly as promised. He's gone. 11:02. Took luggage. House alarm disabled. Now or never. I stared at the message, my hands cold as metal in winter. In the driver's seat, Troy gave a single nod, sharp, decisive, then looked back at Harold and Evelyn. Everyone was ready. Only I had to steady my breath. We parked 3 houses away from the gated entrance. From there, the steel fence, guard booth, and cameras of North Ridge Estates looked like the front of a fortress. But Troy knew how to neutralize intimidation. He put on a UPS delivery uniform Harold had prepared, plus a cap pulled low. He held an empty cardboard box labeled fragile. 15 years in law enforcement had taught him one thing. Sometimes the best way into a secure place was to look utterly harmless. Stay calm, Troy whispered before stepping out. We get one chance, but don't worry, I've gotten into places much harder than this. He walked to the gate. The camera scanned him. The guard glanced at the box, pressed a button, and opened the gate as if on autopilot. No questions asked. The gate opened, and the plan began. Troy walked deeper into the neighborhood, and our car followed the internal route unnoticed. Approaching the 3rd house on the right, Grace's, we slowed, stopping under a large tree that hid us from the entrance cameras. As promised, Rosa had left the back door slightly ajar. The curtain flickered gently in the breeze, like a silent plea. When we stepped inside, I sensed immediately the wrong kind of quiet. Not the peace of an empty home, but the heavy silence of a place where life had been stripped away and replaced with control. Nothing was out of place. Not a cushion. Not a single item left casually on a table. No smell of food, no background TV noise. Nothing indicating that Grace had been allowed to live as a normal human being. Rosa emerged from the hallway, pale and signaling us to stay silent. She's in the living room. Her spirit is almost gone. We walked toward the living room doorway. I stepped in first, and my heart nearly dropped to the floor. Grace curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket even though the house was warm. Her once soft hair was tangled and flat, as if life had drained out of it. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken and vacant. My daughter, who used to love jogging every morning, who used to smile brightly after yoga class, now looked as if she had survived a storm that had lasted an entire year. I stepped inside. Grace? She lifted her head, and panic flooded her eyes instantly. Mom, you can't be here! Her voice cracked like shattering glass. "If he finds out, you have to leave now. You don't understand. You can't be here." I didn't even have time to speak before Evelyn stepped forward softly, her voice like a gentle cloth draped over Grace's terror. "Grace, I'm Evelyn. No one is here to cause trouble. We're here to help, to protect you." Grace looked around, her eyes darting between us, as if desperately trying to decide who was a threat. It was the look of someone who had been controlled for so long that she no longer knew how to distinguish safety from danger. I sat down 2 steps away from her, not any closer. Evelyn said Grace needed space, not pressure. I gently took out my phone and opened the message I had received the day before, the message she sent, inviting me to dinner. "Grace," I said, showing her the screen, "this message, did you actually write it?" She stared at the screen, squinting, then slowly shook her head, not to deny me, but as if trying to remember something. "I didn't write this." Her voice was so soft I had to lean in to hear it. That single sentence made my heart tighten. Harold continued. He opened his briefcase and took out the photos Rosa had captured, the forged transfer documents with fake signatures of me and Grace. "If you had signed these, you would remember," Harold said as gently as possible. "But this signature isn't yours." And then I saw what I feared most, and also what I hoped for most. Grace's hand began to tremble, not from anger, not from resenting me, but from fear, and from realizing something was wrong. "No, that's impossible," Grace whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Rosa slowly stepped forward from behind the door, her eyes filled with pain as she looked at Grace. "Ms. Grace, I heard him talking about an accident for your mother, a fall down the stairs, red wine, something that would look natural." Grace jerked her head up. "No, he wouldn't. He's not like that." The word shot out like a spring, reflexively defending Landon, but her eyes no longer matched her voice. I looked straight at my daughter. I didn't accuse her. I didn't judge her. I simply asked, with all the ache inside me, "Grace, do you trust him more than your own mother?" A simple question, but enough to create the first crack in the wall Landon had built around her mind. Grace grabbed her head as if our words were fighting inside her skull. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice a soft thread wrapping around Grace's frayed spirit. "What you're feeling right now, confusion, fear, not knowing who to trust, it's the clearest sign of psychological control. When you stop trusting yourself, when you stop trusting your own memories, it's because someone has taken that away from you." Tears began to fall down Grace's cheeks, first slowly, then all at once, like a dam breaking. I thought he loved me," she choked out. "I thought he wanted what was best for me." I couldn't stay back anymore. I took one step toward her, each step feeling like walking through fire. "Grace, I once believed the same thing about your father." My voice shook, and it took me years to escape. Grace looked up at me, really looked, for the first time in months. "Mom?" Just one word, but inside it was confusion, hurt, realization, and despair. Harold set the forged documents on the table. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on Grace's shoulder. Rosa stood behind her, nodding, affirming everything Grace was terrified to admit. And then, the moment I had waited for over a year finally came. Grace inhaled shakily, her eyes red but clearer now, no longer cloudy with fear. She looked at me, directly, without avoiding, without flinching. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "Mom, I want to leave." No alarm blared, No door slammed. No sound intruded on that moment. Just a mother and her daughter. And for the first time in a long, painful year, I saw light return to her eyes. And I knew this was only the first step, but it was the most important one. The step that brought my daughter back to herself. Troy checked his watch, then looked at me and Evelyn, his voice low but sharp. "We have to go now. He's due for a check-in. If Landon calls and Grace doesn't answer, or if her voice sounds off, he'll turn around immediately." Grace flinched, clutching the blanket around her like a fragile shield. Her breathing sped up, her hands squeezed together until her knuckles went white. Fear had rooted so deeply in her body that just hearing Landon's name sent her trembling. Rosa rushed to the kitchen, grabbed the phone Landon forced Grace to carry 24/7. She powered it off, removed the SIM, and handed it to Troy. "He uses tracking software," Rosa whispered. "I'm not sure turning it off is enough, but at least he can't follow the signal." Troy nodded and slipped the SIM into his pocket. No trace left behind. "Let's go." Everything happened in seconds, but to me it felt like a lifetime. I put a coat on Grace, held her hand, and guided her toward the back door. Every step felt like stepping onto thin ice. I feared the creak of a floorboard, the squeak of a hinge, even the whisper of the wind. Evelyn stayed close, her hand on Grace's back to steady her breath. When we reached the yard, Troy scanned the surroundings. The garden was washed in pale afternoon light. No movement, no suspicious sound, only Grace's shaky breathing and my pounding heart. "Go," he whispered. We crossed the yard, slipping through the side path toward the back alley. Harold's black SUV waited under the shade of a large tree, engine humming softly. I opened the back door and helped Grace in. She trembled so violently she clutched my shoulders and asked 3 times, "Is he coming? Does he know? Can he see us?" I stroked her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're leaving safely." But my own heart was racing just as fast. When Harold pressed the gas, the car rolled forward, pulling us away from the house where my daughter had lived in fear for months. Troy reclined slightly, watching the rearview mirror nonstop. By the time we approached the community gate, my pulse was a drum inside my throat. The guard stood in the road, phone in hand, his face tense. As we drove past, he spoke quickly into the phone. "Yes, I'm checking. Let me review the rear cameras." Harold accelerated just as the guard looked up. But because our license plate belonged to Harold's law firm, which frequently entered the community, he didn't question it. We passed through. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, but relief lasted only 5 seconds. Rosa's phone rang. The piercing sound exploded inside the silent car. Rosa glanced at the screen, her lips paling. "It's him." No one spoke. Only the hum of the engine filled the space. Rosa answered, switching to low speaker mode as planned. "Yes, sir? I'm at the market. Is something—" Landon's scream was so loud I flinched. "Someone broke into the house! The back door was unlocked! What are you hiding? Where's Grace?" Grace clamped her hands over her ears, curling into a tight ball. Troy motioned for Harold to go faster. Evelyn put her arm around Grace to keep her from collapsing. "Sir, I wasn't there. I just stepped out to shop," Rosa said, trembling. "Don't lie to me," he roared. "I'm coming back now. If anything has happened, you know the consequences." Rosa swallowed hard. "I don't know anything, sir." The call cut abruptly. No goodbye, no warning, just dead silence. In that moment, I understood one thing. We had won the first round, but he had just realized he'd lost control, and that would make him more dangerous than ever. Grace broke into sobs, not from relief, but from the panic triggered by his voice, a voice she had lived under for far too long. "He'll find me," Grace whispered. "He always finds me." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her whole body shaking. "No, Grace, not anymore. You're going far away from him now." Troy turned toward the back seat, his voice firm. "You're safe. I promise. I've dealt with men like him, and I know how to stop them." But Evelyn added softly, not to frighten Grace, but to prepare me. "Caroline, I must tell you something. The period right after a victim escapes is the most dangerous phase. This is when the abuser has lost all control, and they become unpredictable. He could turn into a maniac. Very hard to anticipate." I squeezed Grace's hand tighter, my own heart clenching. "No matter what he does," I whispered into her hair, "I won't let him touch you again." We drove into the outskirts where the city faded into lonely hills and old wooden fences. After nearly an hour, Harold turned onto a dirt path leading to Troy's family ranch. "No one will find this place," Troy said. "No GPS, poor signal, no neighbors close enough to see anything. Only my family ever knew about it. And they're gone." The old wooden house appeared in the open field, its roof weathered, its porch overlooking distant mountains. It was peacefully quiet, almost too quiet. We stopped. No one moved for several seconds, as if all of us needed time to come down from the rush of escape. I helped Grace out of the car. The crisp air made her cough faintly. Then she looked around, her expression still frantic but no longer overwhelmed by panic. Evelyn rested a hand on my shoulder. "You just pulled your daughter out of the hands of a dangerous man, but the journey isn't over. This is Grace's most fragile stage, and the stage when he will be most desperate to pull her back." Troy checked the doors, locked every entry, drew the curtains, and shut off all lights that could be seen from outside. He moved with the precision of someone who had spent years keeping people alive. Grace sat on the old wool-covered sofa. I took her hand, cold, fragile, almost weightless. "Mom, do you think he'll come here?" she whispered. I kissed her hair, my voice breaking. "No, he won't find this place, and I won't let him come near you ever again." Grace finally cried, truly cried, for the first time since we'd entered her house earlier that day. No more automatic apologies for Landon, no more terrified whispers, just the sobs of someone who had finally stepped out of the invisible cage. I held her as our tears blended, and I vowed with everything left in me that I would protect her to the very end. I didn't know how many hours had passed since we reached Troy's ranch. The afternoon light had vanished. Darkness spread across the land, yet inside the wooden house, the warm glow of the lamps still couldn't calm the storm inside my daughter. Grace stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the pitch-dark field as if Landon could emerge from it at any moment. She flinched at every noise, a branch scraping the roof, the wind squeezing through the cracks. Her whole body was strung tight, ready to snap. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her shaking legs betrayed her. Evelyn stepped close, gently placing her hand on Grace's back. "Breathe in slowly. Count to 4, then exhale gently." Grace followed the instructions, but her breath broke into weak, uneven fragments, like a torn float barely clinging to the surface of the water. "I'm scared. He'll know I ran," she whispered, trembling. "He always knows. Everything. Mom, will he find me?" I stepped closer, placing my hand over her shaking one, gripping it just firmly enough to remind her she was still in the present, not trapped in that house where she had been held by invisible chains. "No one knows we're here," I said. "No one except the people we trust completely." But Grace couldn't hear my words with her heart. She was still living inside the wound, inside the reflexes carved into her after years of control. Evelyn signaled for Troy to pull the curtains shut. The room became sealed off, safer. The warm light formed a small circle in the darkness, a circle where Grace could finally breathe without feeling watched. "Drink some water," Evelyn said gently. "Your body is reacting to long-term stress. Water will help you settle." Grace held the glass with both hands, sipping it the way someone leaving a desert would. After a few minutes, she sat on the sofa, curling into herself as though she were afraid of taking up too much space. Evelyn sat an appropriate distance away, not too close to pressure her, not too far to make her feel abandoned. "Grace," Evelyn began, her voice soft like a low piano note, "when was the last time you felt truly happy?" Grace was silent for a long time. I thought she wouldn't answer. Then suddenly, a sob rose from her chest. "It was before I married him." She spoke between choked breaths and tears spilled, as if that question had unlocked a door she had kept sealed for years. I felt something inside me fracture. Grace had never told me anything. She always smiled in the photos she sent, always said, "I'm fine," always reassured me, "Don't worry." But her smiles, it turned out, were only masks. Evelyn nodded gently, letting Grace walk toward the truth at her own pace. Back then, Grace swallowed her tears. "I wanted a family. I thought he understood me. But after we married, everything changed." She wiped her cheeks, but the tears kept coming. "He said I was fat, said I dressed like a child, said I didn't know how to talk. He checked my phone every night, said I didn't need friends, said I didn't need you." My heart clenched when she reached that last word. Evelyn asked softly, "When did you first realize you weren't free?" "When I wanted to visit Mom for her birthday." Grace lifted her swollen eyes. "He threw my car keys away and told me only an ungrateful woman runs around chasing other people on an important day. I believed him. I thought I was really awful." Harold, who had been quietly observing, spoke slowly, without judgment. "That's gaslighting, Grace. He made you believe every problem came from your imagination. That's how an abuser keeps control." Grace clenched her hands tightly. "I know. I changed. I wasn't myself anymore. But I didn't know how to get out." I knelt in front of her and lifted her hands. That's when I saw the faint purple bruise on her left wrist. Deep, unmistakable. "Grace." I froze. "Did he do this?" Grace immediately hid her hand, like someone trained to protect the person who harmed them. No. I did it myself." But her voice trembled, weak and ashamed. Troy, who had seen this too many times, shook his head. "You don't need to protect him here, Grace. We know where that mark came from." Grace broke into sobs, broken, abandoned, childlike cries. He only hit me when I talked back, never where people could see, never hard, just to remind me how to behave." I wrapped my arms around her as my tears fell into her hair. "Oh my God, Grace. How did you endure all this without me knowing?" Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder, not to stop my tears, but to steady me. "Caroline, you are not to blame. Men like Landon hide their violence well. They build a perfect image for the world and show their true face only behind closed doors. You could be the most loving, attentive mother, but you cannot see what they make sure you never see." Then Evelyn turned to Grace, her voice firm. "What happened to you is abuse, not love, not protection, not care, but control, erasing and breaking you." Grace sobbed, clutching her head. I think I've been brainwashed," she whispered. Every thought in my head is his. I don't even know who I am anymore. Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. That's something many survivors face, but you're doing the most important thing. You stepped out of that environment, and every passing minute, you are coming back to yourself, piece by piece. Grace rested her head on my shoulder, her eyes heavy. I stroked her hair, feeling her body slowly relax, for the first time since we'd found her. Within minutes, she drifted off to sleep, her breathing still shaky, but no longer terrified by every rustle outside. I looked at her thin, exhausted face, and a deep pain filled my chest, but there was also a tiny flicker, a flicker of hope, because for the first time after years inside that dark box of control, Grace had stepped 1 foot out of it, and I would do anything to help her step out with the other. The second night at Troy's ranch carried an eerie stillness. A stillness that wasn't peaceful at all. It felt like a lake before a storm, unmoving, cold, and ready to shatter at the slightest tremor. Grace had fallen asleep early, drained after the emotional unraveling with Evelyn. But I, despite the burning in my eyes, couldn't close mine. I sat on the porch, staring at the darkness spreading across the hills, my heart tightening with the sense that things would get worse before they got better. And I was right. Near midnight, Troy received a message from someone in his old apartment, a guard from the gated community who saw Landon every day. He went to her cousin's house, yelled at the neighbors, showed photos. Troy, read it, then turned to me, his face darkening like the night swallowing the moonlight. I'm so sorry, Caroline. But he's reached Santa Fe. It felt like someone squeezed my chest with both hands. Is my sister okay? Yes, he didn't touch anyone, but he shouted, questioned neighbors, claimed you kidnapped an adult, that Grace is mentally unstable, showed them pictures of you both. And according to the guard, he looked completely unhinged. I closed my eyes, feeling myself sink into a cold abyss. Grace heard my shaky breath and sat up abruptly, still half asleep. Mom. What happened? Troy didn't hide it. He crouched down so she could see his face. Landon made it to Santa Fe, but everyone is safe. He's just hunting for clues. Grace clutched the blanket, her breathing fractured. He won't stop. Mom, I know him. He'll come here. Evelyn pulled her close, rubbing her back. We're prepared. Tomorrow, when the FBI office opens, we'll file everything. After that, he can't touch you. Tomorrow, Grace whispered, but there was no faith in her voice. That's tomorrow, but what about tonight? Tonight. Tonight was the word that silenced the whole room, because tonight no one knew where Landon was. No one knew how close he might be. No one knew if he had already found a trail. Troy stood, locking every door, pulling curtains tight, checking each window. He placed a heavy flashlight near the bed and took down his father's old hunting rifle from the wall. Just in case, he said, voice low, I pray we won't need it. The house grew thick with tension, a tension so sharp it felt like one wrong breath could break it. When Evelyn tucked Grace back into bed, I sat beside her, holding her hand as she drifted into uneasy sleep, jerking awake at the smallest noise. I held her hand as if letting go would make her disappear. Around 3 a.m, the hour humans are weakest, the hour fear becomes most real, I heard the first sound, a tiny one. But not the wind, not the wooden frame settling. It was the soft, unmistakable tap of someone touching glass. I shot upright, heart slamming into my ribs. I thought I imagined it, but then, crack! Glass shattered from the living room. I leapt to my feet. "Grace, stay here," I shouted, running through the hallway. But Troy was already ahead of me, rifle in hand. "Stay behind me," he barked. I ran anyway. I couldn't think of anything but Grace. Troy flipped on the living room light, and I saw him, Landon. He stood in the center of the room, his face twisted beyond recognition, his eyes bloodshot like someone who hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, dirt smeared on his sleeves. He must have pushed through bushes or fences to break in. His expression wasn't human anymore. It was obsession, ownership, madness. When he saw me, only me, his eyes ignited. "Caroline," he growled, "give me back my wife, or all of you will pay." Troy raised the gun. "Don't move, one more step and I shoot." Landon laughed, a sound so cold it chilled my spine. "You think you scare me? I didn't come alone." And at that moment, headlights blasted through the windows, harsh, blinding white. At least 2 cars. Figures stood behind the lights, silhouettes impossible to identify. Landon's eyes gleamed with mania. "She belongs to me. I'm taking her. And none of you can stop me." I tried to run to the bedroom, but before I could, "No, Mom." Grace stood in the hallway. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't hide behind me. She simply stood there, trembling but upright, facing the man who had shattered her spirit. Landon froze. "Grace, sweetheart." His voice flipped instantly from deranged to sugary poison. "They lied to you. You don't understand. Just come back and we'll fix everything. You just need to sign a few things. I'm doing all of this for you." Grace inhaled deeply. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "No, I'm not going with you." The air in the house detonated. Landon roared, "You're mine! You promised you'd always stay with me! You—" Evelyn stepped forward, calm as ice. "She's not your property." Troy tightened his grip on the trigger. Harold shielded Grace with his body, and I could only stare at my daughter, trembling but standing tall, facing the man who once held her mind in his hands. "Grace," Landon snarled, "you don't understand how dangerous this is. You only have to listen to me." "No," Grace said again, louder. "You're not someone who loves me. You're someone who wants to own me." I saw her knees weaken slightly, but she didn't fall. Grace was fighting the thing that had controlled her every day, and she was winning, even if just barely. Landon screamed, his voice slicing through the room. "If you don't come with me, then no one in this house is leaving alive." Troy immediately stepped forward. "Try it." Outside, the car lights shifted, and the shadows of the figures moved with them. Landon looked toward the window, then back at us, like a cornered animal. And I knew. This confrontation was only the beginning. One wrong move, and there would be blood. I held Grace's hand from behind, gripping it tightly, as if trying to give her strength I wasn't even sure I still had. The standoff among the 3 of us, me, my daughter, and the man who once controlled her life, had gone past the point of return. And I understood that tonight could determine the fate of my entire family. I had never known a moment that could feel both endless and as brief as a single breath, until the police burst into the ranch house in the middle of our confrontation with Landon. Everything happened too fast. Flashlight beams cutting through the windows, heavy footsteps on the ground, and shouts of "Police! Open up!" echoing through the cramped space. Troy didn't even have time to speak before the door flew open. 3 fully equipped officers stepped inside, one holding a flashlight, another raising a hand in a controlling gesture. They swept the light across the living room and stopped when they saw Landon standing close to Grace and me. "Hands down and step back," one officer shouted. But Landon, instead of fear, his face changed instantly. His voice turned soft as silk, dripping with the kind of deceit I had known all too well. "Thank God you're here." He pointed straight at me. "She kidnapped my wife. Grace is in an unstable mental state. I'm afraid she might harm herself." My heart clenched, as if someone had crushed it with their fist. All week I had prepared myself for countless possibilities, but not this. Landon had made the move before we did. He called the police, and he had already scripted the entire story. An officer turned to me. "Are you Caroline Mercer?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady even though my legs were shaking. "We received a report that you forcibly detained an adult against her will and caused her emotional distress." I opened my mouth to explain, but Landon immediately cut in, as if he had memorized his lines. "She's been manipulating her daughter, filling her head with lies that I'm hurting her. I have medical records proving Grace has had episodes of instability. I'm only here to take her home." I felt frozen. Harold stepped forward but was blocked by an officer. Evelyn squeezed my hand gently, reminding me not to react emotionally. But in that moment, Landon's wall of lies seemed as tall as a mountain, while my truth felt like a petal caught in the wind. An officer turned to Grace. "Miss Grace, do you want to leave with your husband?" Grace didn't move. Just hours ago, she had trembled at the sound of his name. Now that question pierced right into her deepest fear. Landon took one step, pretending to care about her. "Come on, sweetheart, come home with me. Everything will be okay." Grace stepped back, only slightly, but enough to make Landon stiffen. "Miss Grace," the officer repeated, "are you being held here against your will?" The air thickened. I felt the whole room tilt. If Grace didn't speak, the police would believe Landon. He had a story, fake documents, and that polished, gentle exterior he had cultivated for years. My knees almost buckled when I saw Grace lower her head, her shoulders shaking. "Grace," I whispered softly, not begging, not pushing, just calling my daughter the way I did when she was little, when she needed to know her mother was still there. Grace lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red, but no longer empty. Something inside her had shifted. A small, bright piece of courage strong enough to push back against the darkness that had swallowed her for 2 years. And in a voice weak but clear, Grace said, "I want to file a report." No one moved for several seconds. Even the officers were stunned. Landon let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Grace, you're being coerced." Grace raised her hand, stopping him. "I am not kidnapped. I left because I was threatened. I want to file a report for abuse." An officer stepped closer. "Do you have any evidence?" Grace looked at me. I nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart. The truth has been waiting to be spoken." Grace opened the cloth bag Rosa had given her. Her hands still trembled, but she placed each item on the table, like she was laying down the foundation of her freedom. This is the audio recording, where he talks about creating an accident for my mother. These are photos of property documents with forged signatures of me and my mom. This is a message I never sent, but has my name on it. The officers leaned in. Their expressions shifted from suspicion to confusion to realization. Harold added gently, "All of these are time-stamped properly. We'll provide full originals first thing in the morning." Grace still wasn't done. She pulled up her sleeve. Bruises, the deep purple marks Landon had left, were exposed under the light. One officer murmured, "My God." Those bruises, They needed no explanation. They spoke every truth Grace had been forced to swallow. Landon's expression twisted. He stepped back, his mouth opening as if scrambling for excuses. She did that herself. But no one believed him anymore. An officer looked at him, cold as steel. Landon Whitmore, you're coming with us for questioning. Landon snapped. He lunged at Grace. You belong to me. You can't. Troy rushed forward, but the officers were faster. They pinned Landon to the floor, twisting his arms behind him as he screamed, Grace, you'll pay for this. All of you will. The click of the handcuffs echoed sharply, a cold, final sound, enough to make Grace burst into tears. The police led him out. The flashing lights from the patrol car cut across the wooden walls, glinting off the tears on Grace's face like broken moonlight. When the door shut, when the engines faded, when silence returned, Grace collapsed in front of me. I thought I was going to die in that house, she whispered, each word rising from years of swallowed fear. Mom, if you hadn't come, I don't think I'd still be alive. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as tightly as I could, wishing I could mend every wound she had endured in the darkness. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking. You survived. You did. You're stronger than you think. Evelyn stepped beside us and placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. This is the first step, and it's the hardest one. Grace held my hand, and for the first time, it didn't tremble. In that moment, I knew that my daughter, the girl I thought I had lost to control, fear, and lies, was finding her way back. Not because of a miracle, but because she had reclaimed something that had been stolen from her, her voice. I once believed that the moment the police handcuffed Landon and took him out of the ranch would be the end of that nightmare. But as Harold had warned earlier, justice doesn't come overnight, Caroline, especially when the enemy is someone who knows how to hide his crimes and manipulate emotions. And he was right. Just 3 days after the break-in, Landon's lawyer filed for bail. I wanted to object, to scream that he would continue threatening us. But the legal system doesn't run on emotions. It runs on procedure. He was granted bail with conditions, a substantial bond and a restraining order. Grace panicked when she heard. He'll find me, she whispered, trembling, and I held her close, listening to her heartbeat pounding in terror. Troy reassured her. He made a critical mistake breaking in. Our case is solid. The moment he violates the restraining order, he's back in jail. But fear doesn't disappear because someone says so. It needs time. And Grace needed more time than anyone could imagine. In the following days, we left the ranch. Not by choice, but out of necessity. We chose Portland, far enough, quiet enough, and full of support services for survivors of domestic abuse. When the car passed the Welcome to Portland sign, I glanced at Grace. She sat by the window, her eyes still darkened with exhaustion, but her face looked less tense, as if she had walked out of a long tunnel, and this was the first light she had seen in years. Evelyn moved to Portland a few weeks later to continue therapy. I knew that wasn't something every doctor would do, and I was deeply grateful. The first session took place in our small living room, sunlight pouring onto Grace's face, highlighting the faint bruises still lingering. "How are you feeling today?" Evelyn asked softly. Grace smiled, a small, fragile smile. "I don't know. Some days, I think I'm okay. But then I hear footsteps in the hallway and I can't breathe." Evelyn nodded. "That's trauma. Very common. You lived in fear too long. Your brain needs time to understand you're safe." Grace stared at her hands. "I feel guilty. for trusting the wrong person, for leaving Mom, for not seeing the truth. I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her nothing was her fault, but Evelyn held my gaze. This was something Grace needed to walk through herself. "Grace," Evelyn said, "victims of coercive control never know they're victims while they're in it. You weren't weak. You were isolated, made to doubt yourself. No one is strong enough to resist that alone." Grace lifted her eyes, tears falling freely for the first time without wiping them away. "I want to believe that." I held her hand. "You're not weak, Grace. You're a survivor." She broke into tears, not the terrified kind, but the relieved kind. While Grace healed, Harold kept digging. When he laid a thick stack of papers in front of me, my breath caught. Caroline, this wasn't just about Grace. The file was packed with evidence of Landon's involvement in shady transfers, forged property documents, and hidden debts. Grace wasn't targeted because she was naive. She was targeted because she had legal value he wanted to exploit. "So that means," I whispered. "It means," Harold said gravely, "Grace wasn't foolish. She was systematically groomed." After he left, I stared out at Portland's gray sky. Light rain began to fall, and for the first time in months, I felt something lift off my chest. Grace hadn't failed. She had survived something designed to break her completely. In the weeks that followed, I saw her change, piece by piece. The first time she laughed at a cat video. The first time she went grocery shopping without checking behind her. The first time she finished a plate of pasta without worrying he would call her fat. The first time she slept 7 hours. Real sleep, not jolting awake from nightmares. And the first time she looked at me and smiled softly, "Mom, I think I'm going to be okay." I turned away so she wouldn't see my tears. I had once believed I'd lost her forever, swallowed by manipulation and fear. But truth remained where lies had tried to bury it. Maternal love doesn't disappear because someone hides it. It only gets covered, and slowly we brushed the dust away. But while we healed, Landon kept making mistakes. He sent anonymous messages to Grace, called from unknown numbers, watched her from outside a therapy office. Even with the restraining order, he kept violating it. And that sent him back to jail. When the police informed us, Grace exhaled like she had dropped a stone she'd carried for years. I held her, whispering, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." But she and I knew fear doesn't evaporate instantly. It melts slowly, like ice under spring sun, and someday it would be only a memory. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset turn the Willamette River red, Grace whispered, "Mom, if you hadn't come for me, I don't think I'd still be alive to see this sky." I squeezed her hand. "You saved yourself when you said no. I only walked beside you." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Mom, am I ready for the trial?" The wind brushed past us, carrying the scent of the river and the quiet of evening. I looked at the daughter who had once been shattered and was now slowly standing tall again, and I knew the final battle still awaited us. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We're ready." We didn't know how long the trial would last. We didn't know what Landon would try next. We didn't know where this would take our family. But we knew one thing. This would be the biggest battle, and the last one. On the first morning of the trial, Portland was wrapped in a thin layer of fog. The sky was gray without a hint of sunlight, but somehow it felt fitting for the moment we were about to face, the moment that would end years of manipulation, threats, and fear. Grace held my hand as we climbed the steps of the federal courthouse. Her hand still trembled, but it was no longer the desperate trembling from before. It was the trembling of someone about to walk into her final confrontation. One fought in public, before dozens of eyes, before the law, and before the man who once held her captive through invisible chains. Troy and Evelyn walked behind us. Harold waited at the entrance, holding the black case that contained all the evidence against Landon. "If justice had a face today," Harold said as he opened the door, "I believe it would be named Grace Mercer." Grace swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and nodded. The courtroom was large but suffocating. On the left sat our side, me, Grace, Harold, and our support team. On the right was Landon and his attorney. I looked at him. Landon appeared in his familiar gray suit, his tie straightened, his hair neatly slicked back. If someone didn't know the truth, anyone could believe he was a successful man here to resolve a small financial dispute. But I knew better than anyone that neatness was only a facade. He sat down at the defendant's table, looking around the courtroom as if this were his stage. And then, when his eyes landed on Grace, he gave a small smile. A smile that was arrogant, taunting, and chilling. Grace stiffened. I squeezed her hand tightly. "Don't look at him. Look at me." Grace turned to me, and in her eyes I saw both fear and determination. The hearing began. The judge, a silver-haired woman whose face suggested she had witnessed many family tragedies, asked each side to present their case. Landon's attorney stood first. His voice was smooth, practiced, and clearly rehearsed many times. "Your Honor, my client is the victim of a long misunderstanding. His wife, Ms. Grace, has shown signs of mental instability over the past year. Her mother, Mrs. Carolyn, removed her from the home against her will, causing her to panic. Several bruises thought to be from abuse were actually self-inflicted due to emotional dysregulation." Grace bowed her head. I saw her shoulders tremble. But Evelyn gently touched her back. "Breathe, Grace. You only need to inhale and exhale." When Harold rose, his voice was calm but razor sharp. "Your Honor, we will begin with the financial evidence." He took out 3 thick folders, each marked with colored tabs. "This is proof that Landon Whitmore forged transfer documents for 3 properties owned by Grace and her mother, with the intent to seize their assets. All signatures have been inspected and confirmed as fraudulent." He held up each page. The signatures were stretched unnaturally. The handwriting of Grace leaned too far to the right, clearly forged, but sophisticated enough to fool most people. Next, Harold played the audio recording, the one Rosa captured while eavesdropping behind the door as Landon talked about a fall down the stairs accident meant for me. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's brows knitted. Landon's attorney tried to interject. "That could have been a joke." "Try joking about getting rid of your mother-in-law in front of a judge," Harold replied, his voice so cold that the courtroom paused for several seconds. Then it was Grace's turn. Grace stood. I heard the soft scrape of the chair, a tiny sound, but loud enough to make me want to hold her all over again. She walked to the witness stand, each step heavy as if carrying a year's worth of fear with her. When she reached the stand, I could see her hands gripping the sides of the chair. "Miss Grace," the judge asked, "are you ready to testify?" Grace nodded. "Yes, I am." The first sentence wavered, but as she continued, her voice grew clearer, steadier. "Landon is not the person he presents here. I lived with him for over 2 years, and in those 2 years, I went through cycles most people never see. It started with sweetness, with care. Then it turned into control." The whole room went silent. No whisper, no shifting of chairs. Grace swallowed hard and continued. He controlled what I ate, what I wore. He told me I was fat, made me diet until some nights I could barely stand. He took my phone every night, read every message, deleted my friends, forbade me from seeing my mother. Her voice caught. I placed a hand over my heart to keep it from exploding. Then came the punishments, Grace said, softer now. He never hit me where anyone could see, only in hidden places. He threatened me if I ever left the house. Then he apologized, brought gifts, and the cycle repeated again. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time she didn't wipe them away. Grace lifted her sleeve. The faint but undeniable bruises appeared under the courtroom lights. A sharp gasp came from someone behind us. Landon's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection! Those bruises!" "Sit down," the judge said, her voice sharp as a blade. "She is testifying." Grace forced herself to steady her voice. I thought the apologies would change things. I thought he loved me, but he only wanted to control me, seize my assets, eliminate my mother. I lived like someone who had no breath left. She looked at the judge, her voice suddenly strong enough to silence the room again. The day I ran, if my mother hadn't come for me, I don't think I would be alive to stand here today. That was the moment I lowered my head into my hands and let the tears fall. But I didn't sob, didn't tremble. They were not tears of pain anymore, but tears of someone who had just watched her child return from the edge of a cliff. The judge took a few notes. "Thank you, Miss Grace." Grace walked back to us. I stood, wrapped her in my arms, and felt her heartbeat against my chest. No longer the heartbeat of fear, but of someone who had reclaimed the right to live. When it was time for the verdict, no one in the courtroom held a shred of doubt. The judge read each charge clearly. Landon Whitmore is found guilty of large-scale financial fraud, forgery of legal documents, emotional domestic abuse, issuing threats to life, and violating a restraining order. I looked at him. The arrogance on his face had collapsed into a fear I had never seen in him before. Sentence: 17 years in federal prison with no eligibility for reduction during the first 8 years. His attorney rushed to say something, but Landon stood frozen, his face pale. I didn't look at him again. I looked at Grace. She walked out of the courtroom, her breathing unsteady but her eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years: life. On the courthouse steps, the city wind blew through her hair. Grace lifted her face to the sky, tears rolling but her lips curved into a smile. "Mom," she whispered softly, "I feel like I was born again." I held my daughter tightly, pressing my face into the hair that had once been drenched in tears, but now smelled of freedom. "Not born again, Grace," I whispered. "You were born for real. This time into freedom, into light, into the truth you fought so bravely to reclaim." And in that moment, I knew our story had reached the end of its darkness, and the doorway to a new life had opened wide for both of us. 5 years have passed since the day the trial ended, since the day Grace walked out of those courthouse doors with tears streaming down her face, but with a heart that, for the first time, understood what freedom felt like. 5 years, not long in a lifetime, yet long enough to heal wounds I once feared would stay with her forever. Now every morning I wake up in our little house in North Seattle, open the window to breathe in the crisp air carrying the scent of young pine, and each time I do, I silently thank life for giving us another chance. Grace is the one who has changed the most. Now 34, she works at a support center for domestic abuse survivors. She didn't choose this job out of ambition, but out of gratitude. Grace once told me, "I don't want anyone to spend years realizing they deserve a different life." I watch her when she stands before groups of women who arrive with dark circles under their eyes, slumped shoulders, exhausted gazes. Grace doesn't lecture or preach. She simply tells her story, softly, like she's speaking to a friend, and that sincerity has saved countless lives. My own life changed in ways I never expected. After the trial, I opened a small bookstore on a quiet street near Green Lake. It isn't large, just 2 rooms with old wooden shelves and soft armchairs. But somehow it seems to hold an entire world. Sometimes I host gatherings about domestic abuse, inviting women who have lived stories like ours to sit together, drink tea, and speak of things they never dared to say out loud before. I'm not an expert or a therapist. I'm just a mother who once lost her daughter to darkness and was lucky enough to find her before it was too late. The bookstore gradually became a refuge for wounded souls. Some come just to listen. Some stay to rediscover themselves. Some silently place a book on the counter and cry. And all of them remind me of this simple truth. Surviving isn't just continuing to breathe. It's reclaiming your life after the storm has passed. Rosa lives near us as well. She, the woman who risked everything to warn me that night, has become an irreplaceable part of our family. We often joke that life stitched us into a chosen family, and sometimes the family you choose becomes stronger than the one you're born into. Every weekend we cook together. Rosa always brings her cornbread that she proudly claims is better than the Mexican place down the street. Grace brings a vegetable salad Evelyn taught her to help rebuild healthy eating habits. And I make chicken soup, the dish Grace used to crave but never dared cook in the years she lived with Landon because the smell bothered him. Now we cook it every week as a small symbol of freedom. But healing isn't a straight path. There are nights when Grace jolts awake, sweat soaking her back, her eyes wide as if she were seeing him standing in that ranch house again. But instead of shrinking in fear, Grace calls my name. "Mom, where am I?" And I go to her, kneel by the bed, hold her hand, and say, "You're home. There's no one here." The nightmares have grown fewer with time. The panic spells shorter, and small things like laughing at a movie, slowing down to watch the sunset, or stepping into a clothing store without fearing judgment are quiet victories we celebrate in our own way. We built a new home, not out of wood and brick, but out of peace, respect, and love untouched by fear. A home with no stalking footsteps, no controlling gaze, no threats, just 3 women, my daughter, Rosa, and me, walking out of the past and into a future on steadier legs. One evening on the balcony, watching the sun melt into the horizon, Grace rested her head on my shoulder. The orange glow on her face made her look like a completely new version of herself. Not the old Grace, not the shattered Grace, but the Grace of today, strong, grounded, and free. "Mom," she whispered, "the moment I escaped him, that was the moment I returned to you. I thought I lost you, but really, I lost myself." I held her hand, feeling like I was touching a life she had stitched back together with her own courage. "No, sweetheart," I said. "You never lost me. You were just wandering through a place that was too dark. I only did what mothers do. I went to find you." The sky that day glowed a breathtaking shade of gold. I knew our story had reached its end, not in sorrow, but in hope. The deepest wounds had finally begun to heal. I know I lost many things, The years Grace spent under manipulation, the empty nights without messages, the days wondering whether my daughter was alive in spirit or completely broken. But I also found everything again: my daughter, my family, and myself. And if there is one thing I want to offer anyone listening to our story, it's this: a mother will fight to her very last breath to pull her child out of the abyss. Not out of obligation, not out of duty, but because love never gives up. Thank you, yes, you, for staying with me until the end of this story. Where are you watching from in America or anywhere in the world? I would love to hear your voice, feel your heart, and know whether our journey touched a corner of your own life. If you felt a pain like ours, please remember, you are not alone. You deserve peace. You deserve a love that does not hurt you. Share with me in the comments. Every story you tell could become a lifeline for someone still sinking in silence. And if you want to walk with me through more stories of healing, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like. Not just to support us, but to let me know there are hearts out there walking beside me as we keep lighting the way forward. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for your patience, your empathy, and for becoming part of the light that helped my daughter and me step out of the darkness. I hope to see you again on the next journey.